I'm going to start if you want to start live streaming. All right, Council, just before we start the meeting, so for the record, we have 6 members of the public in Council chambers, including a new reporter from Stoke FM. Megan, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, Council, I'd like to call this regular Council meeting of May 24th, 2022 to order with adoption of the agenda. Someone want to make that motion for me? Councilor Brooks Hill, seconded by Councilor Elliott. All in favor? Motion's carried. Adoption of the minutes of the regular Council meeting of May 10th, 2022. Councilor Gillette, seconded by Councilor Palmer. All in favor? Motion's carried. Any business arising from those minutes? Councilor Gillette.
Thank you, Worship. In our last meeting, or in this meeting that we're looking at, I believe it's our last one, we were talking about the BC Transit annual agreement. Since then, I have sat down and met with Scott Haas, our local operator, and one of the things he mentioned was that the BC Transit conference that I'd attended before the pandemic is once again being held in person this spring in Victoria. He was asking if I was going to attend. It's the last week in June. I am able to attend if that is in Council's purview, and if there's, I'm curious if there's anybody else from city staff that were planning on attending that conference by chance, if Ingrid's on. Are we through Ingrid or Steve or Mr. Black?
I don't know. So any staff going to the BC Transit conference? Any staff online? We'll clarify that after.
Okay.
And then we'll talk about that, and if you want to go. So I will ask if council's okay with that, and then we'll talk about funding and that sort of thing. So is there any comments from council regarding that conference?
What, maybe a question, what you were at the earlier presentation, what was the what culminated from, what did they talk about?
It was an annual conference of all the operators and a lot of the BC Transit staff to get together for a strategic planning session. So I was able to meet the CEO, I was able to meet other operators that had worked with Mr. Black and Mr. Pass in the past, and really push the idea that Revelstoke wants to be a leader and to be available for any pilot projects they might be looking at for some of the more innovative transit solutions we've talked about in the past. And so now with our annual and future plan in place and accepted or ratified or adopted or whichever the term is from council for going forward, I'd just like to be able to follow up with those same people in person once again if we can.
Are there any other comments from councilors?
Just general, my perception of BC Transit is everything is very slow. I mean, the buses run on time maybe, but the process is so mundane and so cumbersome. You're dealing with government, making change. And it's great to have all these discussions, but nothing seems to come from it. As far as I can think, we've been banging our heads for 4 years to try to improve the BC bus in our local neighborhood. Nothing seems to happen. So it just seems very. If you can go out there and make change, great. But I just find it so tedious.
Councilor Palmer.
Thank you, Mayor Sulz. Question for my councillor Elliott. Are they slower than us?
Well,
yeah, but you don't need to answer. In seriousness, you're right. BC Transit is a big government entity and it's slow to change. However, they're more receptive to change than they have been in previous decades. It doesn't mean they're that fast still, but there is progress that's being made with BC Transit. And one of the missing pieces for Revelstoke is for us as policymakers to be pushing them, because if we don't do that, then that machine is going to be what that machine is.
Right.
And we have pushed a little bit, not as hard as I would have liked, but there has been some incremental changes with the amalgamation with the shuttle with our transit. So it's a tiny step in my opinion, but it is a little step forward. And so I see this as an important, I think it's important for Revelstoke to go there, especially since there's other interests, with the caveat that we're going to continue to push for more modern transportation methods. So Mayor Sulz, I'll put a motion on the table that Councillor Gillette be authorized to attend BC Transit, what is it called?
Annual conference, I
Annual
believe.
conference with appropriate expenses as per policy.
Okay, so second for that motion, Councillor Brooks-Hill. Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor
I
Shaw.
will forward the information I have thus far, but I can follow up with staff and make sure that the rest of council is in the loop on what's going on, the workshops that are coming up. And that I'd like to open up a discussion in Microsoft Teams about BC Transit and that conference to be able to open that dialogue a little bit more between council and staff on any current issues or ideas that we could then push for.
Okay, any further comment?
Yeah, I agree. If we can find a voice with BC Transit, that's magic. But we've asked for electric bus, free transit, any marketing scheme to enhance ridership, and nothing is coming. And I just wonder if a conference is, I don't know how we can, if you can make it dent, then great.
I appreciate. Yeah, and to your worship, I appreciate that there are definitely needs to be realistic expectations. This will not be a magic ticket ride to the newer transit system of our dreams, but I do think it's an important push, and I do hope to bring back notes and comments on what I think the next steps are to be able to continue to push those dialogues.
Okay, all right. Seeing no other comments are on the table, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. All right. Any other business arising from the minutes? Seeing none, I'll go on to DPP permit 2019-23. Staff, do we have a presentation before we start?
To your worship, no presentation, but staff are here to answer questions should there be any questions from council.
Okay, so let's get item number 1, and then there's a bunch of secondary lettering with that. Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, I'll put the motion number 1 as written.
Okay. And so with that motion, is there a seconder? Councillor Gillette. Now, section A, yard exception, setback, canopy projection to 0 meters from the front lot line. So, Mr. Simon, I'm just going to ask for clarification on that, if we could, before we vote on that. So, could you go ahead, please?
So to your worship, section 5.9 of the zoning bylaw relates to how much projections are allowed to go into the minimum setback requirements. So in this particular case, because you'll notice with item C, they're looking to reduce the minimum front yard setback to 3 meters. They would be looking to allow the canopy to encroach the remaining 3 meters so that the canopy would be right at the edge of the property line. So the canopy would be 0.0 meters from the property line, and then the building would be 3 meters setback.
And that canopy basically is a walkway to the front of entrance of the building, correct?
To your worship, yes, that is correct.
All right, thank you. So for clarification, Ms. Floyd, are we going to vote on each letter individually or as a group?
No.
As a group, all right. Moving on to number B, lot coverage. So increasing the maximum lot coverage from 50% to 66%. Any comment, Mr. Simon, on that?
To your worship, the lot coverage variance is needed just due to the size of the building. So I believe it's a 50 by 100 or 30 by 50 meter lot. So it's a good sized lot, but generally speaking, it's not sufficient to accommodate the intended number of units.
Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Palmer?
Just a comment on the setback for the projection. I looked at that and I see that as an advantage for this particular building. Yes, it's coming right to the lot line, but this is on Victoria. It will improve this, and I think it's in the report, improve the streetscape along there as the aesthetics. There's a picture of it, and I think it shows quite well. The other thing that I was thinking about that projection of that walkway coverage is the property won't need to be removing snow along this their sidewalk. The ingress into the building, and then that avoids potential snow removal going onto city property. So that, to me, it's a good addition for the city. On the lot coverage, this will come with the other, but I see that as an advantage. This is the increase of densification infill in our community, allowing for more units, which I think is important.
Thank you, Councilor.
Yeah, just to clarify, so from that lot coverage, for the lot coverage increase, is that to make the units larger or to include more units? And was the developer originally planning to have fewer units? What's the backstory there?
Mr. Simon, comment?
So through to your worship, originally, or through your worship, Councillor Rind, originally this was a rezoning application and it was going to have to go to a comprehensive development zone. Council had adopted changes that allowed for greater flexibility and utilization of the C6 zone with recent zoning bylaw number 2299. Hence why you'll see this application, the DP was from 2019, and then we have a development variance permit from 2022. So with those changes, the applicant did not need to rezone. However, they do need multiple variances, one of them being the lot coverage. The lot coverage relates to the area that the building footprint itself takes up. So with that increase in building footprint, it does allow for an increase in the number of units without necessarily having to go higher.
So just to clarify, so initially if they had to rezone to a CD zone, then they wouldn't have had to apply for those variances?
Through your worship, that is correct. The CD zone would have been crafted specifically to accommodate this development proposal. And one of the challenges that the city has been facing is our over-reliance from a planning perspective on CD zones for applications that typically would not warrant a CD zone.
Okay, and then just one final question on that. If that's the intent, then does this not sort of set up the development services department to get a lot more similar applications, where there have to be more variances to accommodate developments like this?
Through your worship, Councillor Rind, we do anticipate potentially needing some variances from a planning perspective. It would be more advantageous to get applications that require some variances rather than a comprehensive development zone every time we have an apartment complex or a row house development that's coming forward. And what this ultimately points to from a planning perspective is the need to review in a comprehensive manner both our residential as well as our commercial and mixed use zones that are contained within the zoning bylaw. We did that first phase, which was a great initial cleanup. It put in some, what we would, I guess, likely refer to as temporary fixes that allow the zones to be more usable. The next step is going to be really looking at those residential, commercial, and mixed use zones in more detail to figure out what's working, what isn't working, how can we develop these zones in a way that will not only provide clarity for the public on what they can expect, but also make it easier for applicants to provide the type of housing that the city is in need of right now.
That's it?
No, that's good. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on what kind of certainty that provides for neighbors in general, and just like the OCP and the guidelines that are created around that, and the chances that there could be these large variances granted doesn't give a lot of confidence to people when they're thinking of where to buy and things like that. Is that an issue that you see?
Through your worship, I think the zoning of the property is more indicative of what can be built. The variances are getting into the specific development regulations. Does this mean that someone could potentially purchase a lot and then have a building that's constructed larger next to them? Yes, that's always a right that someone has the ability to make an application for, but it would be the same thing in any other of our single family residential neighborhoods, where if you have an empty lot next door to you, you could still have an applicant or a neighbor apply to vary the height requirements of the zoning bylaw to build a large single family dwelling. So that's always a possibility that comes forward when there's, redevelopment or empty lots adjacent to a property.
Thanks.
Follow up. Any other comments from council? Okay, Councilor Palmer?
Yeah, I'll comment just a couple of things on just further to Councillor Ryan's question. So if the applicant had gone to a CD, another CD zone that would require the rezoning, and I would have found that very, very irritating because we have way too many CD zones. And so I think this is a more appropriate. There isn't an OCP amendment, so I believe that's a red herring because there's nothing that contradicts our OCP in this.
Right.
And as And we've had other examples where we've, in the short time I've been here, where we've had CD development. So I'm thinking about the fourplex on Townley. That was a CD zone, which I think would have been better through variances because it's a unique parcel rather than going to a CD zone. So I feel much better about this approach. And I think that as we evolve as a community and we're trying to increase density, that this is a really good example because there's minimal impact on the community. It's on Victoria. It's a high density area. That there's not conflicts with the car dealership next door. I think those are some of the important factors. And then this whole idea about getting housing. How do we get market housing? We've been focusing on non-market housing, but how do we get market housing into our community, more units? And when I look at this particular design, even though it's not directly related to the resolution, these aren't huge units. There's 680 square feet for a single bedroom unit, and the two bedrooms are around 1,200 square feet. And I think those are kind of demand that we're really seeking in our community. So I think this is, I'm very much in favor of where this is going.
Okay, all right. Any other comments from council? Councilor Bergstrom.
I generally agree with what Councillor Palmer said. I think that this is a good direction, giving a developer greater density in exchange for rental housing agreement. I think that's very important moving forward. I do greatly appreciate that the residents who've written in, and it is a concern, parking. This is kind of a perpetual problem in Revelstoke is parking, and I am concerned that 24 parking places for 24 units with 3 guest parking places. Where are people going to park? They're going to have, if there's 24 units, there'll probably be 30, 40 vehicles. So where are the other 6 to 10 vehicles? And then people show up, and then where are people parking? So that's my one concern. I don't know how we could change this because I'm supportive of the proposal.
So I want to work, Councillor, I want to work through the lettering and get to the parking, and we'll actually ask Mr. Simon to weigh on that. Are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah. Good. Councillor Shalai, can I ask you just to close that door if you wouldn't mind first, and then you can ask your question. So we're kind of dealing with lot coverage right now to 66% of that lot coverage to get all of the units in. And I think Mr. Simon has indicated there his thoughts on that. So Councillor Shalai, you have a question?
No, just a comment to agree with what Councillor Palmer and Councillor Brookshill have mentioned about the lot coverage and the increasing density through variances rather than needing to go through rezoning. I think this does fit with the conversations we've been having through the OCP revision of what does more density look like. I think this is a great example of what it could look like, and we do have some challenges to face, but I think this is a good direction to go with to simplify that process as much as we can, but then highlight where we've seen those variances and what do we need to discuss moving forward to update those zoning bylaws in the long term.
Okay, I appreciate that. Okay, moving on to minimum front yard setback from 6 meters to 3 meters. Comments on that, Mr. Simon, please.
Through your worship, the main reason why the variance is needed for the front yard setback is to allow more space at the rear of the property so that they were able to get those additional 6 surface parking stalls. Staff are supportive of the variance to the setback as it does allow the project to be more feasible. And one of the things that we should be considerate of is that Victoria Road is one of our scenic corridor areas. And as you start to update regulations and rules within a scenic corridor, typically you're going to see larger lot coverage abilities, reduced setback abilities, and taller buildings so that you're promoting that high quality aesthetic for buildings that are facing onto the scenic corridor roads. So, but the main rationale here provided by the applicant is so that parking can be provided at the rear.
Great, thank you for that. Any comments about that amongst council? So now I'm going to go on to the height of the building. So the variance is to increase maximum height from 10.5 meters to 18 meters. But actually, we're not at 18 meters with the entire height of the building. Is that correct, Mr. Simon? We're at somewhere around 14. Can you just clarify that for us, please?
Yeah, for sure. Through your worship, that is correct. And I apologize, the image that I put in the report there probably doesn't do the best job at pointing it out. But so you're looking at a building height increase from 10.5 meters, which is the bylaw minimum, to about 15.2 meters. They're probably closer to that 15 meter mark, but just because they haven't gotten all the way down the road with final detailed design, we don't want to see a minor change in grade result in them being slightly over with height. So 15.2 meters gives a little bit of breathing room, but then the rooftop amenity space is what would bring them up to about 18 meters. So under the zoning bylaw requirements, if a rooftop amenity space takes up less than 10% of the area of the roof, then it is fully exempt from building height requirements. In this particular case, the rooftop amenity space exceeds that 10% area rule, and therefore it is included in the building height requirements. Hence why council needs to grant the variance all the way to 18 meters to consider the proposal in its current form.
Great, thank you for that. Any comments from council regarding height?
So just on the rooftop amenities, what, are we talking garden landscaping or?
Yeah, can you clarify the rooftop amenities, Mr. Simon? Or
through your worship, yeah, at this time, I don't think it's been fully confirmed, but they'd be looking at having general amenities for all residents of the buildings. They've had discussions about a rooftop garden. I know one of the things with rooftop gardens is how do you make sure that it's appropriately sealed for all the watering that needs to occur. So that's been one item that's been discussed. Patio space, barbecues, general amenities to promote that continuity for the residents of the building.
Social space more than
Yeah. Good. All right, let's move on to required off-street parking. And then let's talk about the setting of parking facilities. So off-street parking, so we're going to have reducing the number of required parking spaces from 36 to 24, and then the minimum visitor from 5 to 3. Comments on that, Mr. Simon?
So through your worship, one of the items to be considerate of here is there were recent changes to the zoning bylaw that from a planning perspective, I think are introducing the concept of parking bonusing in areas that have walkability in a conservative way. So we started off at 500 meters. So if a building is within 500 meters of a pharmacy, grocery store, as well as a bus stop, and then provides one bicycle parking stall per unit, they qualify for parking bonusing under the zoning bylaw requirements, which ultimately reduces the parking from 1.5 stalls per unit to 0.5 for a bachelor or one bedroom, and then one stall for a 2 or 3 bedroom or more. So if they were a couple hundred meters down the road and they qualified for that parking bonusing, then their total parking requirements, including the visitor parking, would be 22. In this particular case, they meet some of the requirements, but not all the requirements for parking bonusing, and they are about 730 meters away from the nearest grocery store and pharmacy. We'll note that they exceed the maximum total of bike parking stalls, so they did provide more than what the minimum were. And there are 15 units out of the 24 units that are one bedroom. And typically speaking, a really standard requirement in many zoning bylaws is basing parking requirements on the number of bedrooms, which is something that the city would be looking into as part of future revisions to the zoning bylaw. But as of right now, we don't have that in there other than the parking bonusing. So 15 one bedrooms and 9 2-bedroom units, which staff would anticipate reduces the overall demand for parking requirements. That would be below the minimum standard in the zoning bylaw.
Now, Councilor Brookshill, anything further on parking that you would like to elaborate on?
I have one further, maybe 2 questions, but are there any plans for an electric vehicle charging station port?
Mr. Simon, any comments?
Or is that?
Through your worship, I'm trying to recall off the top of my head the exact number. I know that they have been considering it for the underground parking. I do believe that many of the stalls there would be equipped with EV. That's something that should council wish to add a condition onto the variance, that's something that could be accommodated, I believe. There's also one dedicated car share parking stall that you can see in the site plan here. That would be stall number 6 at the rear of the building.
Good. Thank you, Councillor Gillette and Councillor Palmer.
Thank you, Worship. Just a few comments on the parking requirements. While I can empathize with the concern around parking spaces, having seen the crowds that can appear, I do appreciate the comments around the size of the units. The parking for bicycles is something that I really appreciate seeing, because I know a lot more people in town that have the bicycles. The bicycle parking is just as much of a problem as the car parking in my mind, and especially in apartment units. So the fact that they're thinking ahead and making that many available, I still don't know that that would be sufficient for the number of units. It's the same concern as the parking with the cars, but I appreciate that it is above the minimum and it's a great step in the right direction. The car share spot, I think, is going to help move in the direction that we want to go, which is making it easier for people to have fewer cars in our community, to make that more functional. Having a car share vehicle parked at your location will help with that amenity, as will the improvements to our transit system, so they can get on the bus right out front of their unit. With the description of how close they were to qualifying to not needing that variance, I am supportive of this.
Okay, Councillor Palmer.
Also supportive. Agreeing with Councillor Gillette on the bicycle component. To me, there's actually an increase, and with the lifestyle that we have in Revelstoke, there's actually an increase of parking here as we shift towards cycling community. Couple comments on that. It's interesting, the concept about requiring the electric charging station. I would hope the developer would just be intuitively thinking that they need to do that from a marketing perspective as we shift. The other sort of thought in his comments on electric bikes, because there's been quite a rapid adoption of electric bikes. And, potentially, we have the car share component, so that's an added bonus. We have more bicycle units. I wonder about the idea of electric bike share as well. Something that could be considered. I don't think that's in the something council should be interfering with at this point, but I think there's more positives in this than negatives.
And we're seeing that sort of thing in larger communities where you can pick up ABC bike and it's GPS located and you put a credit card in and away. We'll see those sorts of things come as time goes on, but thanks for bringing that up. Councillor Elliott.
So part of the parking regulations that are in place are for a decade past. What's the decade ahead look like? And what's the decade beyond that look like? So this apartment building is meant to be 40 years out, 50 years, 100 years maybe. That's the thinking we should be aligned with. We're trying to find a way to deal with the transit, the mass transit, get the people to use that, get rid of the car. That's everything we've put into our master plan. So why doesn't this to me aligns with what we're trying to promote? So I'm trying to get cars off the road. I'm trying to get less paid. We've all been pushing for that.
Good. Thanks for that comment, Councillor.
Yeah, I think bikes and transit are obviously great in the direction we want to be going, but the reality is people need to get to Revelstoke. It's not like we live near a major airport, and even people who are coming for the season are likely to get a car so they can go on trips on the weekends and things like that. So I feel like if we're making this concession, even though they don't meet the bonusing requirements, then that's not really fair, because even in some other developments, we've required them to pay in lieu of those parking spots. So wondering if that's an option that's been floated with the developer to pay for those few units that they are getting because of this bonusing and have them be paid for so that they go towards the city for planning parking downtown and things like that.
Any comment regarding that, Mr. Simon? Is that in a bylaw?
Through your worship, the cash in lieu of parking regulations is intended to be there at the desire of an applicant as a way to meet the minimum requirements of the zoning bylaw. In this particular circumstance, given the costly nature of developing underground parking, For a proposal like this, the applicant has opted to apply for a variance, whether or not they would be open to paying cash in lieu. I imagine if they were going to do that, then it would have been submitted with the application proposal, because again, the way that it's worded in the zoning bylaw and the way that it's intended under the legislation is to be an option at the applicant's disposal as a way of meeting the minimum requirements, rather than as a potential negotiation tool, I guess, between staff and the applicant.
Councillor Ryan, follow up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any developer is gonna offer to pay for anything that they don't have to. I think that's sort of our job, is to say that variance isn't gonna be granted, and then have the discussion on what that looks like. Because I agree with you guys that the right direction is to allow for more biking spots and less parking, but I do think there should be something in it for the city. So that, you know, we have a lot of other issues that bylaw, the parking in lieu bylaw, is there for a reason.
Yes.
I would say that's living in the past. That's addressing the way we are and the way we've been for the last 50 years. The road systems are all based on the automobile.
I think it's actually opposite, because we need money for like taking all of the parking that we have downtown and creating a new plan that allows for more biking and allows for more transit. And we're gonna have to update the infrastructure to accommodate those changes. But if we don't get that money from the developers, how are we gonna pay for that?
Okay, comment noted. Councillor Palmer.
I concur with Councillor Elliott on, where are we going in the future, and a separate issue in some ways, but the cash in lieu for parking, I think that whole thing is a mess that needs to be addressed by council with, with assistance from staff. Anyway, I think it's just a messy thing, and it would seem like the wrong tool in this case, because if the intent is finding other parking spaces, well, where are we going to develop those? Again, sort of looking at the bicycle, the cycling thing I think that's a really important component, reducing wear and tear, looking to the future where we're going. So yeah, just concurring, Councillor Elliott.
Great, thanks for the comment. I want to move on to section F, to reduce the minimum distance of parking area to multifamily dwelling from 3.5 to 2.3 meters. Comment on that, Mr. Simon.
Through your worship, so what that is referring to is the distance of the parking area at the rear and how close it can be to the actual multifamily dwelling itself. The zoning bylaw requirement is 3.5 meters, and the proposed requirement from the applicant is 2.3 meters, as shown in the area in green there on the screen.
All right, thanks for that clarification. All right, before we vote on this, because this is some interest in the public, I'm going to allow the public to speak if they've already sent something in by letter. We've received that. If they want to speak about something else regarding this, or the A through F that we've talked about, I will allow the public to come to the podium, state their name and address, and give us their opinion based on the items that we've talked about here. So is there anyone in the gallery? Please come to the podium, state your name and address, and you can speak to us, sir.
Nicholas Thomas, 1302 First Street West.
Mr. Thomas.
I'd just like to share how stupid I felt this morning when I realised that for all intents and purposes, we're effectively implementing the new OCP. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Any other comments? Councilor Palmer.
So I believe the developers here as well.
Mr. Rowe, would you like to speak? Do you have anything that you would like to share or comment on?
Sure, please. Jason Rowe, representing with Tyler, Delaurier, and Fraser Blyth, this project. A couple issues to understand is a lot of the variances are to accommodate proper underground parking spaces.
Right.
In order to a full vehicle turning radiuses, all that stuff takes into place. That's another reason why the height variance is there, because we have the underground parking. The idea of creating more parking spaces would mean less units. So it's a balance you got to choose. You want to have more units availability and you want more parking, but we can put more parking in, but then we'll shrink the building down and we'll go with the 9 units we're allowed now. It's not an ultimatum thing. It's just a reality of, if you want to put in 24 units, we can't accommodate in the current bylaw, which I agree with councillors is from the past, stating that we need to have this incredible amount of cars. We have the park building right next door. We have 10 units that are fully for rental, and we don't fill that parking space. We have 16 parking spaces. It's not full because most people are here that are renting either a car share or they take the bus or the shuttle that goes to the resort, because a lot of them work at the resort. In fact, out of the 10 units in that building, they're all leased by Revelstoke Mountain Resort for staff. And we expect that we're going to do the same in this building. So it is a balance, but and we did work with Paul quite a bit on parking, and it always came down to, if we had to create more parking, we'd have to reduce the building envelope because you couldn't put parking underground. Another layout of parking underground takes up too much space with ramps, and then the cost becomes out of touch with being able to actually build the units. When you start to go into multi-levels underground parking, you need to increase your density, 3 or 4 times what we have out there, which obviously wouldn't work for Revelstoke in that size of a lot.
Okay, thanks for that comment. Councillor Palmer, you have a question?
Yeah, question, if I may. Thank you, Mr. Rowe, for coming in. I had actually thought about contacting you because I had a couple of questions specifically on the electric charging stations. Do you know what your intent is?
Yeah, so we actually did work with the city on this. Each underground parking space will be wired to be able to put an EV station in there if the person who occupies the unit wants to do so.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah.
Good, thank you for that. Any other questions, Councillor?
And so this isn't a short-term rental, the zoning doesn't allow for it, right?
No short-term rental.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Good.
Any other questions?
No. Someone else with their hand up, if you'd like to come to the podium, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rowe. State your name and address, please.
Nadine Cameron, 105 King Street. With all due respect to Mr. Rowe, the apartment building next door that they own, in the summertime, the parking lot is empty. In the wintertime, they're parking all over King Street. The laneway, which is not King Street as noted on the drawing plans, it is a laneway, single track. And they're parking in the back alley, and the garbage bin unit, it obscures vehicles. There's no sight distance. The parking is not an issue this time of year because people walk, they ride their bikes, they do all the other wonderful outdoor things. Wintertime here, people don't like walking. They can't ride their bikes. There has been an issue with that laneway. I'll keep referring to it as a laneway. It's not King Street. King Street stops at the T intersection to the back alley. Those drawings need to be corrected. It is a single track road that we're going to increase the property density of 15 units, so 15 and 9, so you've got another 30 people in that neighborhood, plus visitors and or children and or animals. There's already an issue with dogs in the neighborhood. The apartment building next door has at least 3 large dogs in it. Plus there's other dogs in the dwellings in the area. So there's conflicts there. The traffic off King Street onto the laneway, if there's on-street parking, it's going to even be more congested because even though Jacobson Ford, when they were allowed to develop in that area, weren't supposed to be using the back alley. But as time goes on, people build new habits. And the back alley is extremely busy with traffic to and from Ford and also the classic towing vehicles. So parking will be an issue, and I do understand that we need to move forward in life and reduce, but that takes so much time. And as we spoke earlier in the meeting, there is an issue with transit ridership. They're not going to be taking the bus from the new apartment development, which I think I'm not against the development itself. It's the parking issue. That's what I'm against, it's the parking. The only bus that's really rode in this town is the resort bus in the winter. It's heavily used. by people who want to work at the resort and people who want to play at the resort. So please consider the parking will be an issue for at least the next 20 years. Because Revelstoke takes a long time to change.
Okay, any other comments? Any other comment from the gallery? Councillor Charlotte, do you have a question?
A question through you to perhaps staff. The point around King Street turning into a laneway interests me because I think we've seen that elsewhere in our community as well, where there's developments happening on some of the roads that are traditionally not well used, especially when we talk about snow removal. Maybe they only have a single lane cleared and it works for low density, but as we allow for more development in these areas, there is going to be more pressure on these roads. So I'm curious as to, and I know our master transportation plan is coming up for the next round of engagement where we start looking at the future of our community and where are those opportunities to improve the transportation in our different neighborhoods. And I'm curious as to whether staff have any comments around that King Street laneway up to Jacobson Ford and what the vision is there.
Mr. Black, any comments regarding that back alley behind the apartments that goes directly into the back of Jacobson Ford?
Through your worship, the transportation master plan does not look at details as in light of a small alleyway. It's a bigger picture piece. It is a small street, and yes, again, we are looking at this as if we can get people out of their cars, hopefully those cars will stay there and not be on the road, and they can take transit or ride their bikes. This sort of density is not out of line with other communities, and so that's the reason staff supports this. And yes, King Street is small. We acknowledge that.
So, Councillor Palmer, you have a follow-up question.
Yeah, question to Mr. Black. So that portion of King Street, so there's two, it looks like there's two portions. There's the main road and what we're currently referring to as an alley. Is that actually a street, or are they two separate legal entities? I'm not sure how exactly that works. Is that an actual street, but just very narrow, or is it an alley, or do you know?
It is an actual street according to GeoCortex, but it is small.
Right.
And because it is servicing such a small neighborhood, that's the reason that it is the way it is. Unknown at this time whether or not it needs to be expanded, much like the CP Hill properties. Areas like that have been serviced by small roads for some period of time.
Yeah. So just so I think that's probably something for staff to look at on the congestion. So I'm assuming cars right now can go both directions on the narrower portion, or is it one way?
Well, you haven't been down there. I can honestly say if you met another car, one's going to have to pull over. It would be very tight. It would be like trying to squeeze two cars on the current Big Eddy Bridge.
So I'm wondering if it is one way or if it should be one way.
Any comment on that, Mr. Black?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is a perfect example of traffic calming. If this was on a network road or a road that serviced, let's assume 50 homes or more, having two lanes is appropriate. However, in this case, and please take this, my personal feelings here, it does allow for traffic calming, and it does make people go slow having congestion and narrow roads like this. The wintertime, it does become a bigger issue, but I think it also allows your neighbors, and that's who are going to be using these roads, for you to become acquainted with your neighbors and show respect to your neighbors and pull over when people are trying to get through. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Black. Any, Councillor Elliott?
So just as you go down King Street, you end up in Jacobson's parking lot. That's the exit there, right? You go around.
Well, so and I'll kind of give it from my perspective. If we were to go over onto First Street and drive up King Street from First Street, you would drive into the back of these apartments. And then if we look at the map, it also calls the back alley King Street. And so what Ms. Cameron was saying, she believes King Street to be that short street in front of her home, and that this other that we call King Street in our map to be more of an alley. And so if you were to go to that alley, you meet that T intersection, you could turn to the left and you would take it down to Jacobson Ford, turn to the right, would come back out to Wales. And so that's kind of the configuration of that. So, Councillor Palmer.
So I'm just trying to wrap my mind around this because we are looking at on the future and some parking problems. Any place that's getting higher density tends to have more parking challenges. But for clarity, is there going to be essentially there's one designated parking spot for each unit? Is that correct to the plan?
Underground.
Underground?
Is that correct, Mr. Simon? Underground?
Through your worship, yes, that is correct. There's 21 stalls underground and then 6 above ground. So each unit will have one dedicated parking stall.
So it seems to me that as a modern building, that essentially anyone going in there needs to understand that they have one parking stall. This is not a place for people with 2 vehicles.
Correct.
This is a place for people with 1 vehicle, unless they have a second vehicle that happens to be a bicycle or electric bike. And I think that's the direction that we're wanting to go as a city.
That's correct. And so thank you for that comment, because that is the direction we're wanting to go. Councillor Chalette, did you have a follow-up question?
A final comment on the conversation on the laneway access. I think it's going to be important for us to have this conversation of what, because I don't disagree with what Mr. Black is describing as this idea of traffic calming, that this is not a way to scoot around a busy road to take a shortcut through a residential neighborhood. I appreciate that that is an important thing to protect. However, it does need to be functional. I used to live on that particular alleyway several blocks closer to downtown, and I can tell you it is not a pleasant alleyway to drive down. It has been paved in the past, but it has deteriorated, as many of our roadways have, to a condition that it is just not pleasant.
Yep.
As we start adding more traffic to these laneways, because I anticipate seeing I hope to see more apartment complexes like this developed along that area, especially with some of the older properties that really should just be torn down. Like there's boarded up homes near where I used to live. That, I'm confident, is part of our paving strategy and part of that conversation, that yes, it will happen slowly and it will take some diligence and persistence, that we continue to invest in that very important asset that we can get around. But I do agree that this is a needed added mix to our housing mix in the community, that yes, we need homes and facilities for people with more vehicles to be able to accommodate for families, but we do also need smaller places like this that will accommodate to that other lifestyle that we just don't have nearly enough in our community.
Great, thank you for that comment. Mr. Thomas, you have your hand up. You can come to the podium, and I'll ask if there's one more comment after you, and then we are going to vote.
Yeah. I'd just like to make a comment on this business of through traffic through that laneway and up King Street. It is quite common for visitors to Revelstoke to come down First Street to get to the top of the Farwell Hill there. They see that the bottom of First Street is a dead end. They then turn up King Street. They then turn up the alley to get out onto Victoria. That happens quite frequently, so it is a through traffic route.
All right, thank you for that comment. Is there anyone else in the gallery that would like to speak to the apartment complex? Seeing none, council, any further comments on the motion on the table? Councillor Elliott.
Just as Mr. Thomas mentioned, the OCP, the current rendition, the one that's been vetted through the community, has this zone as higher density apartments. So is that correct?
Yeah, we're heading in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think at the start of the election, we were trying to find a solution to the housing problem, which is rampant in North America. But apartments, non-government funded, or that this is a private entity that's engaged in the process, seems to be something we've been begging for. I know it's unfortunate that the parking, there'll be some inconvenience, and there may be issues with the roadway, but I think ultimately it's the greater benefit that has to be weighed. And
Good. And thank you for that. I think the proponent's trying to do the best they can, especially with the underground parking. And it will be up to the proponent to police that for their residents. And, you know, we keep saying, and our previous mayor used to say, it's up to everyone to be a good neighbor. And so we're going to be depending upon that. Councillor Ron, you have a final comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good application and I'll be voting in support of it, especially given that it's not for short-term rentals, it's, you know, intended to be for staff housing, all things that we're in need of. But I do think it's just important to note that it feels like staff or council sort of feels like beggars can't be choosers and, you know, we have these variances and we should accept it because housing we're in such dire need of housing. But I do think going forward, it just is okay to expect that developers would like meet us in the middle in exchange for those valuable bonusing, in exchange for the density bonusing. So I mean, I'm supportive of this time and probably next time, but I do think that the city should be working to getting some more out of these developers.
Any other comments before I call the question? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? No, motion's carried. Thank you. Let's move on to item 2. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councilor Palmer?
The development permit DP 2019-23 be approved for form and character for the construction of apartment building at 1219 Victoria, and the rest of the wording as per the agenda.
Okay, which also includes an updated landscape plan. Seconder for that motion, Councillor Gillette. Any discussion on the motion? Any comment, Mr. Simon?
To your worship, no.
Okay. No comments from council. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Item number 3, please. Councillor Gillette.
That the owner provide a security for the due and proper completion of landscaping in the amount of 125% of the amount identified in the cost estimate to the city of Revelstoke in the form of cash or unconditional irrevocable auto-renewing letter of credit issued by a Canadian chartered bank or credit union prior to issuance of a building permit.
Seconder for the motion, please. Councillor Ryan. Any discussion on this motion? Councillor Elliott.
Nadine, your property on the corner there,
Yes.
is that influenced, do you get traffic riding over your lawn?
Oh, I have traffic riding over my lawn.
So-
I'll come to the podium. It's just there.
So just a second, before we go, this is to do with the landscape.
Yeah, well, if it's landscaping, we're talking for the project.
Yeah.
She's immediately adjacent and her lawn's affected by this.
Okay, so I don't think we're talking about that, but I will have Ms. Cameron come to the podium.
I'm sorry.
And now that you've brought up the question, she can make comment.
Yes, I do have people driving over my lawn and my driveway constantly. I put in a brand new asphalt for driveway last year. It's already starting to see severe wear and tear because people drive on my lawn. And I don't pay for a corner lot and taxes. I'm cutting my nose off to spite my face. So it's a laneway, it's not King Street. I pay for a frontage, not a corner lot.
Okay.
I just wanted, I knew we were talking landscaping, so.
It is really bad. And Mr. Thomas, he'll end up with the same problem with people parking on his lawn. And even the Tisdales, everybody's been parking everybody's lawns.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councilor Palmer, thank you.
So speaking to the motion, this is about the landscaping and making sure we have the security for that. There might be some stuff that staff addresses with some of the nuisances that are in the area. Not related to this motion, but related to the conversation. I think it is looking at enforcement in that area as we shift. And there has been a shift in our community in the downtown for more proactive initiatives for ensuring that there's not the parking problems, but that's not part of this.
That's not part of this, no. And I led the question because he had asked, so thank you for that. And so, any other comments on the landscaping fee? Councillor.
The only reason I brought up the landscaping then, because I think landscaping could be added to Nadine's corner there, because it's adjacent to the.
Well, we can?
But it's
So one thing I want to make clear is this is about building this apartment, and the issue is already the use of the laneway that's going around that has, so we can't, what I don't want us to do is say, okay, we're gonna blame this apartment building on something that's already happening, so we need to make sure that's clear.
I gather that. If
Yeah.
we're talking landscaping, this is a landscape feature. Could be
Okay.
added to the.
Yeah, and so enforcement and making sure that she's done is something that we'll have to deal with, and I'll talk with Mr. Black about that. Any further questions on item number 3 regarding the fee? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Someone will put 4 on for me. Councillor Gillette.
That the owner shall enter into a housing agreement with the city in accordance with section 483 of the Local Government Act for a minimum of 15% of the dwelling units as per section 5.18B of zoning bylaw number 2299 prior to issuance of a building permit.
Seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Elliott. Discussion on the motion. Any comment, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, not too much. 15% of the total dwelling units would equal 4 of them. Staff will be working with the applicant to bring a separate housing agreement bylaw forward for council. And this is something that I think is further to Councillor Ryan's point about negotiating with the applicant to make sure that the city is getting much needed amenities. And in this particular case, the amenities would be the underground parking, as well as the 4 units secured through a housing agreement.
Great, thank you for that comment. Any other questions or concerns from council? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Thank you, staff. And we are now going to move on to item 5D, Development Variance Permit 2022001, 800 Moss Street. So any presentation, Mr. Simon, Ms. Hartley? Thank you, folks.
Through your worship, there's no presentation. However, I'm here if there's any questions regarding the staff report and application.
Okay, so thank you, Ms. Hartling. So someone want to put the motion on the table for me? Councillor Palmer.
The development variance permit DVP 2022-001 be approved at Lot A and as per the, as written in the agenda, to allow accessory dwelling units, garden suites, to allow garden suite to be located in the front of the principal dwelling.
So Councillor Shaw.
Second motion.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm one step ahead here. Thank you. All right, Councillor Palmer, do you want to speak to this?
Yes, it's an interesting application. I think this is a good use of development variance. There's a unique situation here. Don't know all the history behind it, but it looks tasteful and it makes sense. It certainly had me thinking about where garden suites belong in properties, because that's a substantial change that this council's made in the zoning bylaw to allow garden suites. And so this is an interesting application. Looks very, very tasteful, and I'm supportive of the motion.
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm supportive of this as well. I've had a look at the front building and then putting the other one in behind. So the existing building will become the garden suite. That is a very long, large lot that goes all the way to the greenway. So this is a great addition to this neighborhood. And as you can see on the screen in the blue there, that very large lot. And I think this is something that we can support and look forward to these sorts of things coming to council. Any other comments from council regarding this motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to announcements from the mayor. Just one announcement next week, starting May 30th, Bike to Work Week. And so there are things going on in the community for Bike to Work Week. Our Parks and Rec department have breakfast, I think it's from, or snacks from 6:15 to 9 down in Grizzly Plaza every morning. So if people have teams or they want to scoot on by with their bike and get a snack on their way to work, really most good way to get to work. And anything that we can do to get people out of their cars, as Councillor Elliott says, and move them to work is a great thing. So thank you. Moving on to 9A bylaws, election procedures. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councillor Charlotte.
That election and Assent voting procedures amendment bylaw number 2328 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Brooks Hill. Any discussion on the motion? Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Ms. Floyd, any comment?
No comment, your worship, other than just to keep things up to date with respect to some changes in legislation.
All right, thank you for that. Councillor Charlotte, comment?
The voting by mail, if I understand this correctly, it's going to continue to be easier to request rather than voting in person, is that correct?
That's correct. So now that's open to all eligible voters, where
Right.
previously you had to be out of town or unavailable
Right.
during any of the three. And now you'd be sitting at your home and it wouldn't make a difference.
For whatever reason, why ever someone would want to vote that way, if it's no sweat off our back, I really appreciate this being more accessible. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Councillor Plum.
Do you have an idea of how many people did mail in last election? Not, well, I guess both the by-election and the previous election.
The previous election, I want to say, was about 60, and then there were more for the by-election. We probably had 130.
Right.
Ish.
Right. Okay.
Okay. Seeing no other comments, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item B. Someone put that motion on the table for me, Councillor Charlotte.
That the bylaw to repeal the City of Revelstoke and Revelstoke Limited Water Bottling Plant Fire Protection Agreement bylaw number 2329 be read a first, second, third, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, Councillor Brooks Hill. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Charlotte.
I just really like seeing something old taken off the books. Thank you.
Now,
It's a rare
there's nothing there, so repealing it's a good thing.
Makes sense.
So, the question,
Yeah,
so the plant itself is no longer in use?
that's my understanding at this point.
I know there was an attempt to reinvigorate it.
Yeah, I know somebody, before they did all of the work on the highway out there, they were working on that, and then I'm not sure. Chief DeRosa, you're here. If you'd like to weigh in or comment regarding that plant, whether it's being used, and any other comments, go ahead, please.
Certainly, Your Worship. The building is still there. However, I don't know who is operating it, what they're doing with the building, or even if it is operating at this point. However, I do believe the bylaw is very specific to cop bottling. And so if that is not currently the company that is operating it, then it's the bylaw puts the city at risk, as well as it may open the door for numerous other businesses to also ask for similar services, which would then put the city at a risk and stretch our resources if we ever did had to respond to those. So highly recommend removing that.
Great, thank you for that. Any other comments from council?
Just, I know it was a business entity at one time that was doing well, and it then went south, and then it hit by, the building was struck by an avalanche or something out there and rebuilt, and a whole bunch of, there's a whole saga that goes along with it. But is it a business entity that we just want to wash our hands of?
Well, so the bylaws speak specifically for cop bottling limited, so that's kind of the reason repealing. That doesn't mean that, you know, something can't be entertained in the future if that deemed necessary, but that would be up to staff to look at that to see if it's within their purview and in the safety of our community. So any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to item C, wastewater treatment facility loan authorization, bylaw 2240. Someone want to put that motion on the table? Councilor Brooks Hill.
That third reading of wastewater treatment facility upgrade phase 1 loan authorization bylaw number 2240 be rescinded.
Seconder for that motion, Councilor Charlotte. Any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Now, moving on to item 2, Councilor Brooks Hill.
That wastewater treatment facility upgrade phase 1 loan authorization bylaw number 2240 be reread a third time as amended to increase the estimated cost of the construction from $13,593,000 to $16,824,753, and to increase the borrowing amount upon the credit of the municipality from $3,573,000 3,247 to 7 million.
Second for the motion, please. Councillor Charlotte, nice round figures. Any comment, Mr. Black, on this motion?
Thank you, Your Worship. No, given the timing of the grant being received almost a year and a half ago now, we are out for requests for qualifications from contractors and design consultants to work in partnership in delivering the wastewater treatment plant. That RFQ process closes this Friday, and we will then select the best qualified and the most creative contractor engineer team to receive a proposal call, and then we'll come forward with a recommendation for council to award a contract to construct the wastewater treatment plant. And that scope also includes training for 1 year of our own staff. And we believe this is the best way to ensure that, given the current market conditions, supply chain issues, and procurement issues, that this is the best way for us to deliver the project on time and in budget. And so I'm very pleased to see this come forward to council for your consideration. This is the last financial piece that needs to be put in place so that we can construct this facility and work on meeting our federal and provincial guidelines and requirements, and to mitigate some of the issues that we see in summers in this area when it's hot out. And I think you all know what I'm alluding to. So that's my summary. Thank you.
All right. Any comments, Councillor Palmer? You have a question? And Councillor Charlotte.
Yeah, so interesting. So we're going from a very specific amount to a dollar, and we rescinded that. And now we're going to a very round figure of $7 million. What happened? What happened? Why the increase? It's not specific in the report, so I'm not sure if that's for the direct. I suspect I know why, but I would like to hear it.
Mr. Black?
I will try to answer that question, and if I fail, please reach out to Director McCabe. The reason is that given the timing of, again, the original grant submittal, COVID and all the other issues that are out there, the original submission was around 14.5 for the total project costs. By ensuring that we have a little bit of flexibility in the borrow, that ensures that we don't have to come back to council for additional funds, or rescinding this bylaw and coming forward with another one. At least we're very hopeful that that is the case. And this gives us the flexibility so that if we do not need all of that money, we will not be requesting it. But it is a way for us to ensure that we're being conservative in our ask for the borrow.
Okay, Councillor Palmer.
So if we didn't pass this, now we did rescind the other bylaw already, but if we hadn't rescinded that and didn't do this increase, we could have waited until we actually see the numbers.
Mr. Black?
That is my understanding, yes. However, and again, I should defer to the Director McCabe, the timing of these borrows takes upwards of 6 months or more. And so that becomes the critical path for financing the project. And we have to be certain that we have all of the funds in place prior to award of a contract.
Ms. McCabe, comment?
Through your worship, yeah, there's definitely, because this is the sewer fund in particular, there are definitely some issues with making sure that we have enough in the borrowing allowance to make sure that we can cover all of the costs. If the project costs run higher than what is being anticipated at this point. When we have a borrowing bylaw for less money, then we could run into an issue of actually having to do a second borrowing bylaw to cover the difference, because the sewer reserve fund doesn't have sufficient money in the reserves to cover any shortfalls at this time. And so that's what this is set up for, is so we don't have to do it twice. We will only be borrowing for as much as actually is required. At this time, the actual long-term financial plan has the project in at 14.6, with approximately 5 million of that coming from borrowing. And so that's the anticipation, but there's a bit of a buffer there in case it does go over, just to help us with cash flow so that we don't have to come back and go through another alternate approval process and borrowing bylaw if we need more money.
Okay. Follow up, Councillor, before I go to Councillor Schiller.
Yeah, so it would appear to me, and I remember the exact dollar figure way back when, and said, oh, that's pretty precise for something that we don't know. I don't think I challenged that at the time, but it seems to me that in hindsight, we would have had a larger amount, maybe not $7 million, but something more roundish at least. I guess a follow-up question is, the timing of the borrowing. So I think that's important for interest rates and where that's going. And is that a factor in this as well? Or and what does that timing? Do we need to wait till we actually have some real numbers, or how does that work?
Through your worship, as soon as we have a borrowing, so we have to go through this third reading of the borrowing bylaw. And then the next step is it needs to go off to the ministry for certification. Once it's been certified by them, it comes back to the municipality, to the city, and then we will advertise for 2 weeks. And then we will start what's called the alternate approval process. So there'll be a 30-day period where people who are against the borrowing have the option to come in and speak to that and sign a petition. If that petition is not successful, in other words, it doesn't get squashed, then we can go, it comes back to council to get adopted, and then there's a whole bunch more timelines with quashing periods and things like that stretch it out. And then I go out to MFA once all that is done and take it to to them for borrowing. And so yes, it's a very long, drawn out process.
So what would be the earliest date that we would actually be applying to the MFA for the borrowing?
Spring next year.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Schiller.
So from what I understand, then this being the last financial piece and us starting to negotiate the contracts of what it would look like and choosing the organization that will be providing the service for our community, which is long awaited, and I'm excited to see it come forward. This seems to me like getting all our ducks in a row so we can move quick when we're ready to go. And with the supply lines the way they are, I fully support that. I appreciate the details around the alternative approval process. I was going to ask about that, but I feel clear on what is coming next. Thank you.
All right. Councillor.
So just so I understand, we had an estimate ballpark number of 14.1 as our project cost. Is that correct? Stephen?
That was through your worship to Councillor Elliott. Yes, that was the case, and that number was put in place prior to my arrival here. So I believe that was in 2018-19 when those first numbers came forward. And so given where I'm sorry.
Sorry, was there any contingency built into that number?
Yes, there was. Yes, there was at that time.
Yeah, so we've surpassed that contingency and now we're going for another buffer. Is that what I understand?
Where we are right now is the pricing had been updated in the liquid waste management plan to, I believe, around 14.6. I believe these numbers are very conservative as they are now at the time. So that was last fall, I believe. We're continuing to see changes in timing for procurement of pipe and various other materials at this time, including even concrete. So again, we're asking council's consideration to give us the flexibility up to $7 million. We're hopeful that it does not come in near that number, and actually will come in at the number that we brought forward in the liquid waste management plan, which was about 14.6. But if we do get numbers that are higher than that, then we want to be able to move forward quickly and not have to come back to council with another borrow, which can take another 6 months.
Is the reason for the escalation, the delay in him actually going after this project? Because we were granted the money for $10 million or so roughly from the federal government or provincial government 2 years ago. Or
It was just last summer. It was actually just last year. So
sooner the better, I guess. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and key to that was completing the liquid waste management plan. And so we still have a very robust plan to implement and to make sure that we have a system that's functional through at least the life cycle of the next OCP. And so that'll give us 20 plus years, and that's at the growth rate that's projected in there. Will we achieve that? Don't know. We might get more time out of it. So let's see where we can go. And the good thing is that the system that's been designed will continue to fit within the existing footprint of our system now. And so we don't need to look forward to acquiring new lands in the future. I think we're in a good position as a community to move forward.
Thank you.
Okay, Councilor Palmer.
So just for clarity, so the estimate of 13,593, that's in the motion on the table. So when was that estimate? What was the date of that estimate?
Any comment, Mr. Black, previous amount?
I can definitely tell you that it was a pre-Steve Black arrival to Revelstoke.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And then the current estimate of 16,824,753. When was that estimate made?
Through your worship, that number is a ballpark number. It was just to increase the borrow from 3.5 to 7 to allow the flexibility in the borrow, and that is all. The numbers are still around 14.5 in the liquid waste management plan, but again, we're being conservative in trying to ensure that we don't need to do this again with the potential, as you've noted earlier, with interest rates rising and having to go through another vote with the community at some time in the future. So it's just a safe number.
So, interesting. The reason for my confusion is this idea of, it's just for council, because that's a very specific number down to the dollar, but we're now hearing that it's a ballpark. So we need to understand that's a ballpark estimate. And it's just important information for me to know that previous figure was from before. And then just one final question. So the liquid waste management plan, we talked about, I was on that committee, and we talked about the finances, the cost of that. I remember challenging the engineers on more than one occasion about escalating costs. So, but this is the number addressed from that most recent thing from the liquid waste management plan, plus a bit of buffer, what you're calling ballpark. Okay, thank you, Mr. Sulz.
All right, thank you, Councillor. Any other comments? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Item number 2. No, that was item number 3. Sorry. On to item D, fees and charges, bylaw 2333, cemetery rates. So someone want to put that on the table for me, I'll discuss it. So go ahead.
That the fees and charges amendment bylaw number 2333 be read a first, second, third time.
Second for that motion, please. Councillor Elliott. So I'm just going to weigh in a bit. We noticed some discrepancies in the rates when we started billing out in my office, and noticed that the capital infrastructure rates were higher than anticipated. So Ms. McCabe's gone back and put them in line with where they were supposed to be. Have I pretty much got that in a nutshell, Ms. McCabe?
You do, your worship.
All right, so that's basically where we're, Councilor Shaw.
Do we know what caused them to be out of whack in the first place?
Just an error when we were doing bookkeeping.
Okay, then follow up to that. I appreciate you having the wherewithal to come comfortably to City Hall to say that there's a concern here with this number, and I appreciate when people feel comfortable coming forward to voice their concerns when they see little details like that. The people on the ground that are engaging with our City Hall in various aspects, and especially with our various fees and charges, there are quite a few of them. So it's a team effort. People see an issue, by all means, ask questions.
Yeah, and so that goes down to my wife as she's doing up the invoicing for our clients, saying this isn't right, something's not wrong, and so she brought it to my attention, took it to staff, and they've got it corrected.
Great.
Go ahead.
Just, I wonder what was the previous number for those fees?
They were about 5% less than what they are today's days. Is that correct? 5%, 10%, 5%?
Yeah, and that's in line with the increase we made in other
Yeah,
departments.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, all right. Seeing no other comments, all those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you, council. Thank you, staff. Moving on to item E, school road safety loan authorization. Someone want to put the motion on, and then we can ask some questions. Councilor Brooks Hill.
That school road safety loan authorization bylaw number 2334 be read a first, second, and third time.
Seconded for the motion, Councilor Shalet. Discussion on the motion or questions? Councilor Shalet.
Just a comment that this is a project that we've been asked for from the community, that we've discussed in a variety of different ways. I'm excited to see what comes forward and the details of this work being done. We have talked about saving up for big projects like this through reserves versus borrowing, but I think that this is a great example of what borrowing can bring to our community by taking a big step to increase some of our services in a way that aligns with our values.
Great, thank you for that. Any other comments from Councilor? Councilor Palmer.
So question to the Director of Finance, timing of the borrowing. When does this happen?
Ms. McCabe.
Through your worship, that will be the same as the other borrowing. It wouldn't actually be borrowed until next spring. However, once the borrowing bylaw has gotten through to a certain point, which is adopted, I can do temporary borrowing to finance it, and then later on convert it into long-term borrowing.
Okay. Follow up, Councilor.
Okay, so
Project
the
timeline.
$2 million, so the capital plan, this is for 2022 is in the plan. And I've spoken earlier on that. I won't go through that again.
Yep.
But so what you would be doing in order for that project to proceed, you would do temporary borrowing in the meantime.
That is correct.
And then is this also subject to alternate approval process?
It is.
So theoretically, we could do the temporary borrowing, but then the permanent borrowing, the electorate could theoretically reject this, which would trigger either a referendum. Is that correct?
Through your worship, I wouldn't do the temporary borrowing until the petition process was completed, because that's when it can be defeated by the electorate.
Okay, so and what's the earliest that the alternate approval process would be completed? Does it not have to, do we not have to have adoption of the borrowing bylaw first? No,
through your worship, the alternate approval process is done after third reading, but before adoption. And so the bylaw does need to get certified by the province, the ministry first, before we can do the alternate approval process. And so the question will be how quickly we can get that certification done, because once that's done, it's about a 6-week process to get through the alternate approval process. The ministry says that it takes 6 to 8 weeks to get that certification. We're hoping that we can reach out to them and hopefully get them to help us out by certifying it sooner than that.
So it's through the mayor, so it's pretty tight, eh?
It's definitely tight, yes.
Interesting.
Mr. Black, you have a comment before Councilor Palmer proceeds?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, so we are very concerned about the timing and trying to be complete by Labor Day in the fall, and so we'll see how everything plays out. Our drawings are relatively complete, I would like to present council with the drawings before we do go out to tender so that you can see what we're up to and hopefully concur with it. We have been working with the school district and the PAC for both Columbia and Arrow Heights schools, and I'm rather pleased with the drawing. So I'm hopeful that we can get to council soon for that. And then if we do not see the opportunity to execute the contracts almost immediately upon schools being let out, then it's probably prudent on staff and the community's part to defer the project until next spring in order to ensure that we can accomplish those works prior to school beginning and not causing more chaos at those locations.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Palmer and Councilor Owen.
Yeah, so without rehashing our discussion previously, what we know is that this is a very, very important project for the community. It feels to me that we are making a mistake in how we're going about it. It's going to be rushed and we're going to regret or have to fix things afterwards on procedural stuff. I'm not sure how I'll vote on this, but I'm just saying this is, I think this is problematic when how we went about it.
Okay, thank you for that. Councilor Owen?
Yeah, I'm in line with that. I mean, to me, as Mr. Black mentioned, we haven't seen any project. We're giving a $2 million or agreeing to a $2 million contract to revamp things. And I say, has the master plan, transportation plan been incorporated into this design? I mean, there are many questions I have on the whole process. I don't know if we're following the right way through. To me, it seems like we're asking for a loan guarantee up front. We'll sign it. Then you go out and present us the plan. It doesn't seem to make sense.
So before I go to other councilors, so Mr. Black or Ms. McCabe, do you want to just qualify that with procedural process, please?
Ms. McCabe.
So, Your Worship, I'm not sure what you're asking for. Is it more about why it's so late that we're asking for this?
Councils are concerned that, so I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, council, so just, you know, that maybe we should see what the project's going to look like before we approve a loan. And so I just want you to why are we at this point here? So to give us some reassurance that this is the way we need to go so that we can get this procedure rolling. That's what I'm looking for.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so this is part of the capital plans, and it was part of the budget process and the long-term financial plan that was approved by council and that was adopted just recently. It is in the 5-year plan for this year. The 5-year plan was adopted a little bit later than usual, which is why this is borrowing bylaws coming forward later as well. It's not ideal, I agree. It would have come through much sooner, but we are where we are. And so, yeah, so council approved this, give it third reading so that we can go to the public to get alternate approval process to make sure that the public supports this. Because if the electorate doesn't support it, then we can't borrow and then the project can't move forward at this time. We'd have to find alternate sources of funding for it. And so this is a way of getting things rolling so that we can continue on. And also any project that is going to be done in any approval of any tenders would come back to council for council's approval. And we wouldn't be borrowing for it necessarily before that. We wouldn't borrow for it before that's done anyways. So council will get a chance to approve the project. And so obviously if the project's not going forward, then we wouldn't borrow for it either. Does that help?
I give you clarification? No, doesn't give me clarification. So I'm understanding that we need to put the process in the work so that we can then get plans and move forward, correct? All right.
That is correct.
Councilor Charlotte.
Thank you, Richard. I appreciate my fellow councillors voicing their concern around the process. I think there's two parts to this. There's the what are we doing and there's the why we're doing it. And the what we're doing, I think, was reasonably well clarified. The why and the timing of things is one of those time crunches where I agree. I think trying to get this project in the ground, like done this summer and this spring with how tight things are moving realistic expectations, it would be lovely, but realistically, it very well might not happen before this fall and next school season. But I don't see that as necessarily a bad thing, because then we would have that process to be able to really dive deep into what that looks like with our master transportation plan, with the school system. Everybody would have more time to be able to look at the plans as they come forward. I understand the hesitancy when we haven't seen those plans yet, but I am looking forward to that report. And I do hope that it does come together in the right order of things, in the good timing, so we can get this done this summer. I think it would make a huge difference for next fall. This fall. And I am in support of the third reading, because I understand that we will see the plan and be able to approve the project before we actually borrow this money. But this is one of those ticking the check boxes that we wish we'd done it 3 months ago. We're getting it done now, so that in 3 months we can be moving forward.
Okay. Other comments from other councillors? Councillor Brooks Hill, then I'll go to Councillor Elliott.
I'm in support of this. I wish we'd done this 3 months ago, but this is, I'm happy to give this third reading. Like, we're not agreeing to the borrowing before we've seen the plans. We're just getting the process going for the borrowing. It still needs to go through the alternate approval process. It still has to be adopted by council. If we don't like the plans, we will tell Mr. Black that. We're not, there's a lot of times for us to say no to the project before it's actually going into motion. This is just trying to get our ducks in a row. I agree, I'm not sure that it's going to happen this year. I think what might be more realistic would be potentially doing one of the schools and not both. But that also depends on what contractors are available and what their schedules are. And so, fingers crossed, we all like the plans. We're happy with them, and there's a contractor available who's just sitting around waiting to do something in August. But I'm more than happy to vote in favor of this and see where we are before we actually, say go ahead and do this.
Councillor.
No, listen, we're all in support of improving school safety. That's a given. I guess the thing is, if you had $2 million or signed for a $2 million loan, would you sign before you even looked at the plans? No, that's the insanity of it all.
Yeah, but maybe, how long it takes to get a loan. You sign up for a $2 million loan, and then you can still back out. You don't sign it. You just start the process. You go to the bank and say,
put its ass backwards first. You just wouldn't do that. That's a normal process. So, yeah, I get it. I guess you want to start things going, but it just seems so screwball.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm supportive of it to get this process moving. Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Note that Councillor Elliott and Councillor Palmer are opposed. This motion is passed. Thank you. Moving on to item F, zoning amendment bylaw 2330 to create RTA 1 and rezone 1944 Leidloff Road. So I'm going to get the motion put on the table, and then we will ask questions. Councillor Bertzel.
I'd like to make a motion for a 5-minute recess.
Okay. So we're going to take someone want to second that? Councillor Sterlett, we're going to take a 5-minute recess, and then we'll get back down to this. Thank you. All in favor? Yeah. Thank you for that, Councillor Palmer.
Coffee break. Oh, we got some smoke break.
Brief 5-minute recess.
You're each after 5 minutes. Go.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm thinking. Yeah, okay.
Considering the average adult attention span used to be 45 minutes,
Last time.
it's a heck of a lot less than that now, I would argue. But
Is your time-
it's nice to have
your
a
time span is gone?
break.
You're good.
I can't see my foot.
You have access to all of it. You're
I know,
so
right?
confused.
Yeah.
Like all the folders.
No, it's yeah, so I think I get email, but I think all the plans and the agendas and council and and the various meetings.
Oh my gosh. It appeared.
Okay, well, that's first. Okay.
I don't do that. What's going on now?
So that's the first one that's come through in a while.
Yeah, but, and I said to Julie, I'm like, can you check to make sure he has access? And she said he does, but maybe. Anyways, you have it now.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very good. In person, you know. Yeah.
That was smooth. Yeah. That's me. Been on my bike. Yeah, I've been on my bike. Yeah, I always get up there. It's wonderful. Yeah, I love it. You've been biking? I haven't been. You gymming? No. What? Just running. Running? I need to get back.
You want to research more, see if you follow looking at.
Yeah. It's just that we see it.
The election was like so soon.
Yeah.
Hey, do you know if you're gonna run again, Nicole? You decided? I'm hoping to make a decision by the time I get back from Assent. I'm kind of waiting to hear back on the enumeration. I'm realizing with this toothache, I really need benefits. Yeah. So if I need to chase a full-time job, right? Yeah. I can't get away with a part-time job and hope to get benefits if I can't get benefits on council. Yeah, so I don't know what that looks like, because they need 3 people. There's, unless they change the rules on that, there's not a whole lot we can do around that. So that's.
Can't get 3 councils to get that.
We couldn't, when we first got elected, everybody said no. Mike said maybe, but everybody else said, no, I'm good, I don't need them. No, I'm good, I don't need them. Well, I do, so thanks.
You have that? What about those powers? I don't have any benefits.
Well, I'm pretty sure I asked several times when we first got elected.
When we were elected, I had benefits.
Yeah, you were the asked.
Nicole, can
Yeah.
you mute?
I never wanted it.
Okay, council, let's carry on with item F, zoning amendment bylaw 2330. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me? Council Barcel.
That zoning amendment bylaw number 2330 be read first, second, and third time.
Seconder for the motion, Council Palmer. Discussion on this motion. So Council Palmer.
Yeah, so it's just, this is consistent with the work that we did on the Thomas Brook area with the changes to the zoning bylaw. So it's good to see some of this stuff getting cleaned up.
Yes, and creating the zoning, the way the staff is going about it, I think is prudent. Any comments, Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, generally speaking, not anything too significant. I don't think that there's anything out of the ordinary with this particular zone. I will say the applicant has been great to work with in making sure that the zone can be flexible enough to be used as a standard zone for other properties within the Thomas Brook, should they choose to rezone. You'll notice that some of the development regulations, we did an analysis of all the existing lot sizes for the properties in the Thomas Brook area to determine what that threshold should be, because there's some very large lots out there and then some smaller lots. So crafting a zone that can address all of the different lot sizes that are out there is a little bit difficult. So you'll see that we kind of landed on that 3,500 square meter mark within the zone to differentiate things like lot coverage requirements.
Great, thank you, Mr. Simon. Council Barcel and Council Chalette.
Maybe I missed it in the report. I'm just, my one question would be, would this new zoning, would they be paying commercial or residential taxes?
I think that's a question for Ms. McCabe, and any comment on that, Ms. McCabe? Mr. Simon, any comment?
Through your worship, taxes are determined by BC assessment. So BC assessment determines the assessed value and then the tax classification that they would fall within. The city only sets the tax rate as per each classification. There are some uses in here that, depending on what an applicant would choose to build on the ground, BC assessment may classify them as a commercial entity. You know, some of the tourist accommodation use, for instance, that could be a small boutique hotel under this zone. So should someone wish to develop that, they could potentially be taxed commercially. But then alternatively, short-term rental is a listed use here, which would be in a single family dwelling. So if someone wants to use a single family dwelling as a short-term rental, then they would be taxed the same way that someone who has a spot zone would be. So it really depends on what's been built on the ground. I'm not sure if Ms. McCabe has anything additional to add to that.
So your worship, I think Mr. Simon did a wonderful job.
Thank you. And I think around this council table, a couple of councils have already talked with BC assessment about that and said, you know, we're concerned about that. Here in the province of BC, it's residential unless deemed other by them. So that's it. Councillor Chalette.
Thank you, Worship. And I agree. I think, and there's a desire from the province to look at property taxation and municipal finance as well over the next few years. So I think there's room there to improve, finally make some serious progress in making this more equitable between residents. I do have a question through the chair about future amendments to this zone. I really appreciate the dialogue about trying to make it comprehensive and more averaging for that area, that this will be one of those zones that we've been talking about. But looking at the report, it has been created with that applicant. And I'm curious as to, in the future, as more properties are looking at the zone and it starts getting used, would it be variances at each property, or would we be looking, is there a mechanism in place to be able to update the zone as needed?
Mr. Simon, can you carry on with that, please?
Through your worship to Councillor Chalette, either or. Someone could apply for a variance depending on the nature, so long as it's not varying use and density. So for instance, if someone wanted to come in and vary floor area ratio, that would not be permitted. You would need to amend the zone. I will say, from a technical planning perspective, the zone is quite accommodating for what the intent of that resort fringe land use designation that council had adopted into the OCP is looking to provide. This is really intended to be complementary rather than competitive with the resort. So things like a maximum height of 12 meters is put in there, so we're not going to see 8-story hotels come up here. Things like capping the maximum number of units for a tourist accommodation use at 8 is included in there as conditions of use. So there's flexibility for the owners if they choose to go to the zone and they say, I want to do 8 tourist cabins and have a nice complementary development to the resort. But if someone comes in and says, I want to do a 400 unit hotel room, then that would be something that would be more appropriate for a zoning text amendment or a rezoning application. So really dependent on the scope of what's coming in the door.
Fair enough. Thank you very much.
Any other comments on the motion on the table? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Item number 2, someone want to put that on regarding public hearing? Council Palmer?
That public hearing be scheduled for June 28th, 2022 for zoning amendment bylaw 2330.
Second for that motion, Council Brooks Hill. Any discussion on that? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Appreciate that. Moving on to item 11, staff reports, COVID restart community grant evaluation. Someone want to put that motion on the table and then we will move forward. Thank you. Take care.
See you on the 28th.
You bet. So Councilor Brooks, you have your hand up. Thank you.
I'm just gonna put the next one on.
Thank you.
That the funding recommendations for 2022 COVID-19 restart grant applications in the amount of $48,000 be approved.
Second for the motion. Councilor Charlotte. Discussion on the motion, Ms. Braun, Mr. Atia, comments?
Yes, I can speak to this. Can you see me? My camera has quit on my desktop, but
No, we
my
saw you
laptop
just
open.
now, but we didn't. Oh, there you go. You're
Can you see me
there.
now? Okay. So essentially, just to recap the process by which we got here, we were directed by council in April of 2021 to work with our social development committee to come up with a policy and a procedure for allocating restart funds to vulnerable persons in the community. So we've gone through that process with a working group of the Social Development Committee and are back before you with our recommendations for the $10,000 maximum amounts as allowed by the policy, as well as larger requests from each of the organizations that have submitted those as per the policy that allows for issues of paramount community concern to be addressed by these groups. And I'm going to let Taha Tea speak to the evaluation process.
Thanks. The working group members received the 6 applications for funds through this grant program and evaluated them for their financial need, their organizations, as well as their suitability and alignment with the grant program, how well they provided services to vulnerable persons and compared to the examples provided by the province. The recommendations reflect the approval of those requests in the maximum amount that the working group could approve, and then forwarded the remaining amounts to council as you see on page 5. I will say that the working group did independent evaluations of each of the grant applications, and the scoring matrices indicated that all of the applicants with successful grants met the criteria in full, and that it was difficult to determine the exact financial need based on the financials, but that those applications certainly met the grant criteria of financial need.
Okay, thank you for that. So council, any comments or questions with the organizations and the amounts in front of us? Councilor.
So I guess we have one motion on the table right now. And then the other one that's in the report, but not on the agenda, is that the full amounts requested be approved. And I'd like to discuss that after we vote on this motion that's on the table.
All right, good. Thank you for that. Any other comments on the motion that's on the table, Councilor Elliott?
The allocation here is that we conceded 200,000 of the restart money to be allocated to the social services sector. Is this the elements that are so there's 150,000 left? Is that what I understand?
That's pretty much it. Any comment, Ms. Brown?
Yes, through Chair to Councillor Elliott. We have, in following the policy, the working group has recommended the maximum approval for each of the applications, except for one which was recommended that be denied. The remainder of the amounts requested by those groups were in pursuit of the additional area of the policy that allows for larger objectives related to issues of paramount community concern, and those are before council for their consideration. But again, as Taha pointed out, the working group strongly supports council's consideration of those as having met all the criteria.
Okay, so there's more to follow, I guess, as this unfolds. Okay.
Okay, so for some reason, I'm not seeing that other motion, but let's talk about this motion here. Go ahead.
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm in support of this. I think it's great to see that there was applicants and that the amount remaining is also up for discussion. I don't know why it's not in the agenda, but it is in the report under the, on page 5 of the report at the very bottom. So I will be in support of this motion and then looking to put the next motion on the table.
Okay. Any other comments on this motion that's on the table? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All those in favor of this motion totaling 48 grand, motion's carried. Thank you. All right, so let's go to, I'm not sure why I'm not seeing this, but go ahead and rattle it off. Oh, okay. Jayleen's got it on the screen.
Just before we put it on the table, I'm just seeing a discrepancy in the report and then the motion suggested, because in the report, it does show the Indigenous Friendship Society amount. They requested 20,000. Oh, it's the amount remaining. Never mind. Sorry. I just did my own math twice. We're good. Okay, my apologies.
On the table. Okay, so that the full amounts requested by the Revelstoke Indigenous Friendship Society, Community Connections, Revelstoke Society, and Revelstoke Community Housing Society be approved.
Second for that motion, Councillor Charlotte. Discussion on this motion. Councillor Charlotte.
Thank you, Worship. I'm excited to see this list of amazing organizations in our community. These are the backbone of our social sector. I appreciate the report and the diligence of the committee that has been looking at these applications and digging through all the financials and the numbers. I'm sure it was a difficult thing to look at when we did put that limit on, but I appreciate that it is coming to council for us to discuss these larger amounts for some of our mainstay organizations. I think that's all I'm going to say on it, but I am fully in support of this.
Okay, any other comments from council? Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, I guess this particular motion, because it was buried in the report, is a bit of a surprise. A question through to staff: is there other anticipated people that are or groups that were interested in applying for this?
Through the chair to Councillor Palmer, the applications were put out to the community with extensive communication over the course of, I believe, 2 social development committee meetings and at least 2 other community network meetings whereby the organizations in the community get together online for bringing each other up to speed on what's been going on. So there was a very strong call for proposals. So I do not anticipate any further ones coming in at this point. But Taha, do you have another input on that?
No further ones have been received in the meantime of the grant application dates. The grant application was open for a full month and advertised pretty robustly through newsletters and those engagements that Ingrid spoke to.
Councillor Palmer?
So Mayor Sulz, I'll be opposed to the motion. I think this is indicating that, going back from the previous conversation on this, that this was all thrown into one area and we've lost opportunity on the COVID restart. I know the money's being whittled away. It's just about all gone now. And I just don't feel that we've done an appropriate look at the total community needs. And I think it's unfortunate that the community as a whole isn't going to be benefiting from, for example, from the Illuminate Spirit Revelstoke Society. I think these other things that the restart funds could have been used, but we've chosen to put it all entirely into essentially the social sector, which is important, but also by the lack of demand, I think indicates that that it maybe wasn't needed.
That's my comments.
Okay, Councillor.
So beyond the 152 that's left in the social money that we gave, is there more, maybe this is from Ms. McCabe, how much of the restart fund is left besides the social spending?
Through your worship, I'm just going to put up my spreadsheet. I can report out on what the balance was at the end of 2021, but some of those funds are being allocated to projects in 2022 as well. And so at this time, there's about 1.3 million remaining at the end of 2021, and there's about 895,000 of that allocated out to some projects, of which 200 is for this. So one of those is the virtual council, the setup and the stuff you see on the walls around you for council chambers for streaming. It is understood that that project will probably come in under budget. And so once I have some updated numbers on that, I can bring that back to council and let you know where we really sit. And then, so right now it's about 400,000 left over. It could be more.
Okay. Colette?
I think when the money initially came, we had the opportunity to make a strategy about using the money productively and really make an impact. And we never got to that point. One of the things that's desperately needed in town right now is employees, and other communities are retraining seniors, or they're making staff accommodations a component of their restart funding. We haven't done that, and I'm just wondering, could we not entertain those concepts?
So, Ms. McKay, you have your hand up?
Yeah, through your worship. The province, when they gave the funds out to the municipalities, it was similar to the CURB that they gave to people, and then the funding they also provided to businesses to help them support themselves operationally. And that was what the money was given to all the different municipalities for. When COVID first hit, there was a lot of municipalities that were very concerned about their cash flows and their ability to fund their budgets, because they were having to shut down a lot of their operations that would generate revenue for them. And so the province responded to that concern that was expressed, and they provided funding out to all of the municipalities in BC based on population for the most part, that was set out to us to help us cover the operational costs that we were incurring because of COVID. And so that was things like extra personal PPE equipment, different changes we had to make in the way we operate. For most municipalities, it was obviously a lot of it was communications and IT related. And so they were clear about what types of expenses were allowed. We were allowed to cover lost revenues. We were allowed to cover IT equipment. We weren't allowed to cover anything else that was of a capital nature or a fixed asset nature, but we were allowed to cover ongoing operating costs that were new and additional, because of course municipalities weren't prepared budget-wise to cover the extensive costs of managing the COVID pandemic. And so that's what the funds were given to the municipalities for. The province did allow one caveat, and that was to provide funding to social societies or social groups or societies within the community that support vulnerable people. That was the one area outside of municipal operations that the province identified as us being allowed to use those funds for. Otherwise, it was to be used for the municipal operations. And so the city's done I think, a really good job of trying to extend out and use those funds in a way that has as much impact as possible.
I think one of the options was municipal operations. It didn't, again, it's narrow focus. We don't look at what we can do to improve things. If senior or seniors, retraining seniors, making them employable, finding a way to make that could have been a project that was undertaken by Oakland College. It could have been offered by the city. It could be something that we could actually be proactive and do something constructive with. We never did those things, and that's been my gripe all the way along. We have an opportunity with whatever it was, 1.7 or $2 million to do something really constructive for our town.
And so, do you feel like there was?
I don't feel baffles in our city hall, and IT made a big difference. That's my take. So,
okay, so I have a question for you.
Please.
You're talking about seniors and re-educating them or giving them some sort of.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you believe that there's a need? I'm asking you that question because no one's come to me and said, hey, there's a need for this sort of thing. No one in the social development community has come to us and said, hey, there's a need for this. I'm asking, did we miss because there is an actual need, or it's because you think, and I'm not asking this in a derogatory way, that you think that there is a need or you've heard something. I'm asking you.
I would
if you
say
heard something.
we are desperate for workers. Now, we have one option in the seniors or youth or whatever. There are many different places you can, but it just needs a progressive look at things and say, what can we do? Whether we just wait till it comes to us, or can we actually do something constructive? Get in front of it. And we haven't done that. And that was what I said that when we initially granted the money, let's be constructive. Let's be really creative and find a way to use this money to the benefit of our town.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that this was squandered in some respects. I think it got, used the way that probably most other municipalities did. I'm not saying that's the right thing, but it probably, we're not out of line with what other communities did. They bought PPE and they updated their IT so they could do online meetings and all that stuff. But I agree that we probably could have thought a little bit more outside the box. But the reality is, like, now that we're 2 years down the road and we have not as much of it very, very little of it, and there is a need that was expressed by the social sector, I think this is a really good use of funds, because it's not as if we have a big amount that we can do that kind of programming now. So I agree it was a missed opportunity, but now we have to face the reality, which is, what do we do with these funds? And there's people saying, me please, and these are the people supporting the most vulnerable people in our community. Or these are the groups supporting the most vulnerable people.
Ms. Braun.
Well, just to add some context to this, early discussion, we did look at other communities, 8 other communities to be exact, and looked at what they were doing with restart funds going towards vulnerable groups. And we had discussed at that point aiming for, somewhere in the higher range of comparable to other communities, about 10% of our overall restart grant going to support people that are vulnerable in the community. And so we were directed by council back in February to allocate a minimum of $200,000 to those vulnerable persons. And the process has been really robust. We have reached out to senior centers, youth centers, organizations across the spectrum. And I think what we have seen is, our initial interest in seeing, kind of the longer term resiliency objectives of this restart funding have been met by these 3 organizations that have applied for a larger grant amount. They are looking down the road. They're looking at how they can build capacity, build out their space with the Housing Society. They're looking at some interesting opportunities for increasing housing for vulnerable members of the community in response to Councillor Elliott's concern. So I do believe we have met the goals of the program across the spectrum and have met Council's direction that we allocate a minimum of 200,000. Actually, we're 2,000 short, but we have met those criteria. And I think I'm really proud of the work that's been done by the Social Development Committee over the past year.
Great, thank you, Ms. Braun. Well, I'm in support of this. We did previously allocate $200,000 to the social sector. You've dealt with it. You've done what council's asked. It's gone to the funding to the people that need it. I'm supportive of that. We're not at the point where we're going to start talking about allocating what's left in the other funds, but this $200,000 was previously allocated to the social sector. I believe you've nailed it. So any other comments, Councillor Chalet?
A couple of comments. One of the ideas that I'm actually quite excited about seeing how we progress as we come past this pandemic, I don't know if I want to say out of this pandemic, but past it, is intergenerational learning. And how do we mingle between our generations and between cultures? And I think the funding that we're looking at putting towards Community Connections and the Indigenous Friendship Society will hopefully be able to support those efforts, because I know in the past, intergenerational learning has been a huge part of the programming through both Community Connections and other nonprofits in our society, because there has been a lot of grant funding available to them from other sources. Right. We do not fund the majority of their work. This was intended always to just fill a gap, to strengthen those core structures of our community. And I think there's been a lot of things that we used to do that we need to remember and really dig back into and ask those questions. Because there's already been a few things we've talked about that, we used to do that before COVID, and we don't really have a list of things we need to bring back. So as we discuss these various topics, we can remind ourselves and our various partners that these are the kinds of things that really help knit us together. And being able to share ideas across different viewpoints and mindsets, I think, is a really critical part of being good neighbors and making sure that these services are available so that we can have organizations that build more staff housing and that we do have more training opportunities for the people that want it.
Great, thank you for that. Any other comments? I will call a question on this motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Note Councillor Palmer is opposed. Balance of council in favor. This motion is passed. Thank you, Ms. Braun. Taha, appreciate it. Moving on to item 11B, annual report. Someone want to put that motion on the table for me, please? Councillor Bartel.
That the 2021 annual report be made available for public inspection and be considered by council at the June 28th, 2022 regular council meeting beginning at 3 p.m.
Second for the motion. Councillor Palmer. Any discussion on this motion? Any comments on the annual report? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Moving on to item 11C, liquor primary outdoor patio, 112 First Street. So there's item 1, 2, and 3. We'll do independently. Item 1, someone want to put that motion on the table for me? Councillor Palmer.
That council endorse staff's comments based on the regulatory criteria of the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, LCRB, for liquor primary new outdoor patio to the existing liquor license at the Regent Lodge.
Regent Lounge. Did you say lounge or lounge? Yeah. Okay.
I'm changing.
Your second. We'll tell Brewskis we changed the name of the facility, right? All right, seconder for that motion, please. Councillor Sherlatt. Discussion on the motion. Ms. Hartling, any comment?
Through your worship, I'm here to answer any questions, but this is a pretty standard liquor license primary application. It's for the Regent Lounge. It's the 112 restaurant and the lounge. And the primary service to the patio will be from restaurant 112, so it'll be mainly food. However, the applicant had to apply for liquor primary due to the service area going through the lounge with the LCRB regulations. And it was in place the last 2 years under a temporary authorization due to COVID and expanding service areas. So it has been out on the street for the last 2 years.
Great. Councillor Palmer.
Yes, just a procedural question, maybe for the corporate officer. So this motion seems, is this standard now for a liquor license? So it just seems a little bit just referring to the report as opposed to being specific. I'm fine with it, but it seems to me that in the past that they have very tight regulations on exactly how the motions are from council.
Yes, Councillor Palmer, I assumed that the recommendations contained in the report were from the LCLB.
That's okay. Yeah, and that's fine. Yeah, if there's any problem, you'll let us know.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Any further comments? All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 2. Councillor Palmer.
That the feedback from residents, if any, solicited, provide a notification letters mailed to property owners within 100 meters of the subject property be provided to the LCRB.
Second for the motion. Councillor Sherlatt, any discussion on that motion? That's a standard usually. Go ahead, Councillor Palmer.
Yeah, it is standard. I always have a little bit concerns about the restriction of the area that's being advertised, but I'm fine with the motion as it is.
All right. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion's carried. Item number 3, someone want to do that one for me? Councillor Palmer?
Yeah, as written.
Okay, that the approve the liquor primary for the following reasons, and staff have done that. Seconder for that motion, Councillor Sherlatt. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Sherlatt.
Thank you, Worship. I'm curious about the cumulative effect of our downtown patios. We have talked briefly on this. Each individual application, though, is a separate conversation. So when we start talking about the volume of patios in our downtown core and the effect of that on parking, is that part of any larger strategy or plan at this time?
Any comment on that, Ms. Hartling?
Through your worship, it has been something that was discussed at a previous council meeting. So staff have been tasked with looking into encroachments on city land and updating policies and best practices. So that is something that we are looking into right now. For the current one today, it is because it's a liquor primary. So food primary patios don't come to council currently. So it is something that we're looking at a comprehensive policy for encroachments on city land, and then updating all of the encroachment policies for awnings, retail displays, patios, mobile vendors, and having something ideally go out to stakeholders first for comment. But it's something that we're looking into right now, and it's sort of internal review at the moment.
Great, thank you very much.
All right. Any other comments, Councilor Palmer?
Yeah, just in response to Councilor Charlotte, just summertime, so there's less demand on the parking area. So I think this is actually really good for the business community and for our community that even though there's parking stalls taken, that's consistent with some of the just dialogue that we've had before, encouraging people to walk or cycle, especially if they're having a beer that they wouldn't be driving. So maybe it's good those parking spots aren't there.
Good comment. Councilor Charlotte.
And just to follow up on that, I'm not so much worried about the drinkers at the patio, because I agree they should be riding their bikes or walking, preferably. I'm more concerned with the building across the street with the tanning salon and the TELUS building, and having, for those with mobility concerns, our downtown can be difficult to navigate. And I just want to be mindful of what that cumulative process is, but I'm satisfied that it's going to be looked at. Thank you.
Great. All right. I'll call a question on this one. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Item number 4. Someone want to put that on for me, Councilor Palmer?
That LIQ 2022-004 liquor primary new outdoor patio report dated May 24th, 2022 be provided to the LCRB as background.
Second for the motion, Councilor Charlotte. Any further discussion on that?
Actually, just a question. It sort of refers to Ms. Charlotte's recent, just previous comment. On the OCP, did they have an overall concept of keeping the downtown walkable and sociable as part of the plan? Is that part of the overall?
Do you want to just do a brief comment on that, Ms. Hartling or Mr. Simon?
Through your worship, yeah, I'll defer that to Mr. Simon, who's working on the OCP currently.
Through your worship, there's definitely a high level of interest in the downtown area and maintaining that character that makes Revelstoke very unique. One of the items that's in the OCP, because it wasn't explored in depth, I guess, with this round of OCP review, it almost warrants its own separate plan. So there is an action item that's currently contained in the draft OCP to develop a downtown development plan, or whatever you want to refer to it as, a revitalization plan. So I think the last time that was done was well over 20 years ago now within the city. So it may be time to look at that again.
Is it the Grizzly Plaza discussion that's ongoing? Does that incorporate the patio space into it's just on the plaza? It's
just
one
that
block?
That's it.
Yeah, because I know the market and all those entities that are focused in our downtown core would love to have walkability as a standard all the time. So you know, just, and I think in Europe or any place with a real cosmo feel to it that has this walkability and this interaction that's at a slow pace.
Yeah, good. Thank you for that comment. All right, I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Moving on to correspondence. So we have 3 letters here in correspondence in response to the letters that I sent out regarding graffiti and encroachment on city lands. So Mr. Maltby, you're here today along with your wife. First of all, happy birthday. So when we talk about these letters, we had some complaints. I think Mr. Black, you may want to speak to this. We had some complaints. So discussed with council, supported these letters being written and sent out to you, and you've now responded back 3 different ways regarding some of your concerns. So First of all, I'll go to Mr. Black and then I will come to you, Mr. Moulton. Mr. Black.
Thank you, Your Worship. These concerns on Campbell have been around for many years, and when I first arrived here a couple of years ago, the issue was revisited and it's come back again. The issue in my mind is one, graffiti on public sidewalks, and two, the encroachment of a structure that's not been permitted on city property right adjacent to the sidewalk. This does create a liability to the city, and it does in fact narrow the sidewalk for people because they can no longer utilize the entire width of the sidewalk because the structure definitely narrows it. I understand that the neighbors are concerned with privacy, and I certainly accept that. However, it is a liability to the city, and in my opinion, it should be removed.
Okay, thank you for that comment. Any comments from council? Seeing none, Mr. Maltby, I'm going to ask if you have comments. Ms. Maltby, you want to come to the podium?
This is not the first time we've had this issue, correct? April 2020, we had pylons on the sidewalk. I'm sitting here listening to all this encouragement for bicycles. That's great. I cycle. Unfortunately, they like to cycle on the sidewalk. 4 times or more, Francis and I have just about been wiped out. And now there's even electric bikes on the sidewalk. So you got rid of the pylons, so we've got a simple walk and bike. And believe it or not, I gardened all weekend. There was only 2 people on our sidewalk, 2. Whereas before there was in the 40, 50. And I talked to you and Don Lowe with my daughter, and you said that the city was doing this signage project. And that when you did that, you would address that, and perhaps you could do a real sign that said bike this way, walk this way. That didn't materialize, along with the residential parking sign that was promised when the pool was put in. And as for so I guess that's the bike issue. I guess we had to solve it ourselves because the bylaw was not being enforced. And even when the bylaw officer was there talking to us, and a person would go by on the sidewalk, there's a bike on the sidewalk, it's your bylaw, it's motor vehicle law, and nothing happens. He just said if he had enforced it here, he'd have to enforce it everywhere. Well, not every piece of traffic in this community goes down Campbell Avenue. When 6th Street was closed, everything comes down Campbell. And we have the Greenbelt access. And the incredible part is that the bike says to go around and in front of the house on the sidewalk, end up at the same spot at the end of the block. So there's absolutely no reason to bike on the sidewalk. And as for the trellis, that trellis has been there for 44 years. I showed you photos. It is not, where the sidewalk ends, the trellis is on this side. There is no impediment of the sidewalk from a trellis, a plastic trellis on wooden bars. I sent you a photo from the 1920s. There was a fence there. We are in an area that is an anomaly because the city grew around this area. Rather than way back when in the 1920s, 1910, someone should have said, oh, now Revelstoke's developing, we need to just wipe out your house because I think the road actually goes through our porch. But the main thing is when all those adjustments were made for the pool, no one took into consideration that now the traffic, the people would impact this neighborhood. And that's where we live. I'm not prepared to move because all the traffic coming. I just want to work with people. We talk to people. And like I say, even the simple little things on the sidewalk have made an enormous difference to us. And I don't know, if you've got a bylaw that says no bikes on the sidewalk, I commented that I was in Victoria recently. The sidewalks have beautiful stencils on them. No vehicles on the sidewalk, pedestrian only. no wheeled vehicles. They're tasteful, and there was, the whole week I walked around, there was no bikes on the sidewalk, so. I know, I have 2 issues, sorry, but we really would like this resolved. Like I said, this has worked, that these, I know they're neon green, and there's just 2 little signs, and yeah, it's our safety, like we're getting on, we look to walk out our sidewalk and have to look for bikes as well as walking out in the street and having to look for cars doesn't compute. And I love the idea of bicycles. I even noticed that you got a grant, and in the wording it said that parkade for bikes in order to keep bikes off the sidewalk. I don't know what are you doing to keep bikes off the sidewalk? And you're encouraging more and more. I've listened today. You're encouraging more and more bike use, more and more pedestrian traffic. And also, if you have a little child and you feel unsafe on the road, the sidewalk in front of the community center has no homes there. It's just the way they come up from the green belt. You know the area, and you can you naturally should just go around, and you end up at the same spot at the end of the block. That's all. We're just asking for people. And like I said, this weekend was amazing. 2 bikes. I was in the garden all weekend.
So I'm gonna ask.
Compliments all weekend too, go out the garden.
Okay, I'm gonna ask about the direction of the bike. So most of the bikes that are on the sidewalk are coming up from the Centennial Park?
Yeah.
Or coming the other way?
They're coming, no, most of the bike traffic is coming from the bottom of the hill up to the top. And then the bike sign, a lot of people will go around, but some just keep going on the sidewalk.
Okay, and so is there any, I guess this is a question about logistics, and I get to why I'm asking this. So if people are going at the back of your home, going around that paved around your yard, coming down, are they utilizing that bike lane, then going down the sidewalk or going over the curb and bouncing down? What are they doing?
Well, if they're on the sidewalk, it's natural. You can either go around the house like on the trail, or you can go down the sidewalk.
Okay.
So either way, you're on the sidewalk.
And so
people stay on the sidewalk until they hit the hill.
Okay, and so I'm gonna ask 2 questions. I'm asking because if your signs are working and we haven't put signs, then we can talk to the engineering department about how we put some signs up that work, because we talked about this a year ago and we haven't got any progress, right? Okay, and probably because I haven't spoken to Mr. Black about my conversation and Don Lowe's conversation with you, right? And that would be on me, didn't get to them. Okay, so the other way is if they're coming around your house from the back.
Like Boyle?
Yeah, coming down Boyle and then coming down. And if there was, a curb where they went down onto the street, do you think people would utilize that both ways, either direction, or are they all on the sidewalk anyway? It wouldn't make a damn bit of difference?
I think they're on the sidewalk anyway. It wouldn't make a difference.
Okay.
I'm going to speak to this identical information as well. So.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to state, sitting here for 2.5 hours and watching the business that you guys deal with, that I understand that our problems are very insignificant. Let me just acknowledge that. To us, they're very significant. To us, they're about 2 things. They're about our safety, first and foremost, our safety, the 2 people that are standing here. And they're also about fairness. I would like to point out that the only complainant my daughter's helped me with this, the only complainant that my daughter could find, we said there were complaints, we only found one on ClickFix, which I think is a dysfunctional website for the purposes of railing against people you don't like in a small town. That's an aside. The only complaints were from a source called 5th Street West or something like that. If you understand 5th Street West, there's one short little branch between Mackenzie and the rec center. There's no other portion except for one portion that isn't indicated by 5th Street West. It's the condominium developments. that are across Boyle Avenue from us. So there's 2 short sections of 5th Street West. Okay, that's point number 1. Point number 2, safety. We have been talking to the city about our safety for probably no less than 3 to 5 years. It's with regards to safety on the road. It's regards to safety on the sidewalk. Now, I should point out to everybody, when the pool was built, the city formulated a committee to look at the pool. I formulated a neighborhood committee because there was a lot of concern in the neighborhood about what was coming forward from the city. I will point out to you that if you look at the 2 proposals, this is important, bear with me. If you look at the 2 proposals in that neighborhood, the one that the city committee came up with and the one that was actually translated into what's on the ground right now are 2 different things. The one that's on the ground right now was the one that the neighborhood came up with, okay? That's really important because what it tells you is citizens can actually participate in planning what goes on in their neighborhood, and quite often they come up with some great ideas. Now, here's a great idea. We approached the city for help with our bikes on our, it was extremely stressful, okay? What I'm going to tell you is over a period of 2 years, 1 group and 2 individuals, bear with me, 1 individual, I'll say 2, solved the problem. Problem solved. We don't have a problem with bikes on our sidewalk anymore, okay? The other group that's really significant is Revelstoke bikers. When they finally got what the issue was on that particular piece of sidewalk, they stopped bicycling on it, okay? So the problem has been solved. We don't need any help, okay? What you're doing with your bylaw enforcement things is you are putting us back at risk. That's what you're doing. You're putting us back at risk. With respect to the infringement or the encroachment, which you call, puts you at liability, walk from my home to Home Depot or Home Hardware, okay? I did, and I took photographs, okay? It's nothing but, you talk about something called community norms, okay? On Campbell Avenue, never mind throughout the rest of the community, on Campbell Avenue, there is encroachment after encroachment after encroachment, right up to Home Hardware. And I want to make it very clear to everybody, I'm not complaining. I don't complain. Okay, that's what I find so frustrating about people that complain about me. I do not complain. We want to be left alone. We're 68 years old. We have lost so much in our neighborhood, natural areas that have been destroyed by developers, and then that destruction has been carried on by the city of Revelstoke. We have had riparian areas in our neighborhood destroyed by the city of Revelstoke. Okay, we've lost a lot. We've done a lot of adaptation. We've solved our own problems. Okay, we just want to be left alone. We have a little natural area in our yard. I'm sorry we're encroaching on city property, but we lost a beautiful meadow that was supposed to be protected in a development permit. Okay, we have a little meadow. We're 68 years old. We like to work with plants. We love flowers. We love bees. We love birds. They're in our yard. We just want to be left alone. Please rescind your bylaw enforcement orders. The only choice left to us, and we're going there again. This will be the 3rd time. We're going to go and take our case to a government agency, a government entity that is based on fairness. Okay? Based on fairness. If you're unable to see the wisdom of our solution, if you're unable to appreciate that we live in an incredibly busy place, and for the records, we moved here from the West End in Vancouver. 44 years ago, we lived in the West End of Vancouver. It is at that time, and it certainly hasn't changed by now, I'm sure, it was the most densely populated neighborhood in Canada. Okay? So we know what busy is like. I'll tell you something. Our neighborhood right now, because it's a convergence area for bikes, pedestrians, cars, and everything, is as busy as it was when we left Vancouver. Okay, the West End in Vancouver and our home right now is pretty much identical as far as traffic goes. Okay, so we're trying to ease out a lot. We're trying to have a quality urban life. Okay, we don't mind living downtown. But spend a few minutes, spend 2 minutes after we leave to think about the situation we're in. Think about the problems that you can't solve. You've got bigger issues to deal with, okay? We understand that. We see that, okay? Think about our safety, okay? Think about our quality of life. If you take that little thing that's been there for 80 years, 40 years as a trellis down, we have no privacy on Campbell Avenue, none whatsoever, gone, okay? If somebody, and here's the key for me. Here's the key for me. When I received those letters, okay, and it said somebody complained. You know what it did for me psychologically? Everything else is on the table, I said. Somebody complains about our flower beds. They've complained about our flower beds. The flower bed has got to go. They're encroachment. Somebody complains about the tree that provides us some privacy in the front yard and some shade. Oh, it's on city property. It's got to go. So the whole thing's wide open as far as I'm concerned, and I'm done with it. This has been going on for 20 years. And I won't even get into the details of the people that complain, 5th Street West, and the date. This is critical. The date, as far as I understand, and my daughter's helping with me, this needs to be confirmed. May 13th was the date this was acted upon, as far as I understand. And that date is very significant for me, because I had a little encounter with Mr. Palmer on May 13th, and I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, thank you for the benefit of your thought. Ms. Moulton, do you have more?
No, I just want to thank you for listening to us.
Okay.
But you really need to take a look at the trellis and the photos and the fact that it's nowhere near, it's not on the sidewalk ends. There's a clear picture down the street.
Can I ask one final thing? No. One final thing. If you want to solve our problems, if you want to help us, okay, if you don't want to enforce bylaws, if the most important thing to you is to help us and to help citizens in their neighborhood, ask us, work with us, okay? Because what we've been experiencing so far is somebody complains, you guys come up with a solution, however you do it, within the mechanisms of City Hall or Council here, okay? And we get it in writing, okay? We know what's going on in our neighborhood. Our neighborhood is designed the neighborhood that we live in, okay? We've got some good ideas. We've got some good ideas about traffic safety too, which I've brought to the attention of the RCMP recently. How you can make it safer for traffic. Take us out of the equation. Talk to the people that live in the neighborhoods, please. Thank you.
For that.
Thank you.
Now, Councillor Elliott has a question before you leave.
It's not the trellis that bothers me so much, it's the overhang.
Well, that was just a plastic pipe we put up in the winter to charge our battery. It's gone.
It's gone.
I take it down seasonally. It's PVC plastic. I actually put a heavier PVC on it. It's been up for about 15 years. We don't drive our truck much in the wintertime, so our battery goes dead. Okay?
Well, it isn't, you know, a standard issue type of thing.
No, but we don't, you have to understand, we don't have a driveway.
Yeah, I
The
get it.
only place we park is right there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
it. That's our only parking spot.
And just for the record, years ago, I used to clear a portion of the sidewalk and string my cord across. If you can believe it, sidewalk plows are instructed to cut cords, okay? I lost 2 of them. That was my solution. Every problem has a solution, and I'm a problem solver.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Councillor
you.
Palmer, did you have a comment?
No.
Okay. Any other comments from council? Councillor Brooks Hill and Councillor Shalat.
In terms of the signs on Victoria's city sidewalks for pedestrian only, no bikes, wasn't it? They had them in Revelstoke
One
like
time.
15 years ago, 12 years ago.
No, it wasn't that long. I think the mayor at the time was Dave Raven.
That's what I was thinking, yeah.
Councillor Palmer may know of that.
So Mayor Sulz, first of all, I'm just concerned about, how meetings are being run. And if we get operational at this level, it's going to be significantly problematic. So I'm not talking about this issue. 2 things, however, regarding issues around transportation and multi-use paths. We've been heavily engaged in the last year with the Parks Master Plan and the Transportation Master Plan. Ample opportunity for providing input. That's the correct place for those kind of suggestions, which are really important. If we try to troubleshoot at this level, at a very, very operational level, it'll be extremely chaotic.
Well, it's not our job. I wanted to entertain that
Yeah,
because
fair
Mr. and Mrs.
enough.
Mulkey were here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay,
All right. Thank you. Appreciate one more comment.
One more comment, and it relates to Mr. Palmer's, Councillor Palmer's comments there. At some point, it would be nice if the council, through their parks planning, designated the 5th Street Park, which is a green space across from our home, because it was in a previous process, probably about 8-10 years ago, listed as something that would be designated as a park formally. To my knowledge, it hasn't been yet. My concern with that is it's an old right of way. And the last thing that I think should happen for it is were it to go to private property, excluding the public from that space. And that's something that I acted to protect for public use 25 years ago in a development permit. So it should be designated as a park, as a city park. Thank you very much.
All right, council, I'm going to move on to Advisory Planning Commission meeting minutes.
So there's also the letter from Bob Walker.
Oh, I don't see that on my list here.
Traffic calming on airport.
Yeah, about the pylons on 4th. Where is it? Yeah.
Let me just, yeah, okay, that's in the package. Any comments on that letter? Mr. Black, I think that was the only complaint we've ever had formally about the pylons. Do you want to weigh in or make any comment?
Through your worship, you see in front of you my email back to administration and the mayor. This is the first concern we have regarding the traffic calming efforts on 4th Street. We are currently working with our consulting team to try and figure out how to keep the traffic calming going and improve the ability for bicycles to utilize the route. So we'll be making some minor changes to that system pretty soon. And as council is aware, through the budget process next year, we will be implementing a permanent solution to 4th Street in conjunction with the Transportation Master Plan and traffic calming best practices so that we can make 4th Street work even better. Thank you.
If I could add some, just from my biking on 4th Street there, a lot of the pylons are missing.
Yeah.
So people have used them as targets, or kids have yanked them off. Yeah, so or trying to weave through them, but there's a lot of them that are missing. So maybe they're not complaining, but they're not being missed by cars.
Of course. All right, now we'll go on to Advisory Planning Commission minutes. Any comments, questions regarding that? Seeing none, do we have any questions from the press? Sorry.
There's 2 more on communications.
Oh my God. Yeah, so what's written on my paper is definitely different than what's in my package. My apologies. I'm following my paper. So let's go on to Grizzly Plaza Enhancement Committee meeting minutes. So comments from you, the chair.
I am the chair, and I would like to comment on this. I'm grateful to see these minutes come through to the committee or the council agenda to be able to speak to it briefly. This was from our earlier April meeting. We have since met since this meeting as well, so I'm assuming those minutes will come through at some point as well, and I'm looking forward to meeting again in early June. We're expecting to see two options for what design proposals could look like, and then to discuss it as a committee to see which parts we like, which parts we do not like, so that the design team can then bring us forward with a final design to approve. I will be working with the design team and with Ms. Richardson in admin to potentially put in a small component for public engagement with some very clearly guided questions. So not an open forum, but more of a, these are the two options we're looking at. Let's see what the community has to say about it. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those look like and look forward to it in mid-June.
All right, good. Thank you for that. Any other comments?
Has there been any dialogue about extending Grizzly Plaza?
There was some, but the scope of the committee is definitely within that one block at this time because of the scope of the grant. Any ideas that fit into beyond that scope will be referred out to both parks and I believe to the Parks Master Plan and Transportation, but will be available for discussion for that expansion of the downtown core and what that looks like. There has been quite a bit of discussion around this idea of street closures and a focus on pedestrian-centric design. And I think that Grizzly Plaza, that first block, will provide some opportunities to explore what that could look like for our community. One of the big concerns is around programming and being able to fill that space in an effective way, because it's not one of the big distinctions that I found really interesting, and I'll leave it at that, in a street mall. Ours is more of a park. It is not a street mall. And so the comparisons between them and the looking at pedestrian-only streets gets complicated in some ways. But I'm looking forward to a more robust conversation around what that means for design in June at the next meeting.
So who asks for, who can put that forward? How do you, because that was a proposal that was in place many years ago.
To expand out. I would invite you to wait until we have these proposals coming out of the committee, but if you'd like to go and meet for beer to discuss and talk about it, I'd love to.
Yeah, I just think it's been on the table for a long time.
And it's, like I said, it has been brought up and it will be referred out for that next step to be taken. The scope of this project and this grant is only that block, and we've been trying to be pretty robust on sticking with that so we don't end up going down all sorts of fun rabbit holes.
Any other comments?
No.
Okay. Economic Development Commission meeting minutes. Any comments, questions? Seeing none, I will now ask if there's any questions from the press, and we have none. So I'd like to go in camera pursuant to sections 90.1A, D, and K of the Community Charter. Someone want to make that motion? Councillor Charlotte, Councillor Ryan, all in favor? Motion's carried. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll go in camera.